My name is Jimmy Corsetti. I have a YouTube channel and a Rumble channel called Bright Insight. And I do consider that the Richtat is by far the most likely location for the lost capital city of Atlantis. It's just so compelling. The Egyptians said that they were colonists, survivors of the destroyed place called Atlantis. The site of Göbekli Tepe and its age could stand, in some people's views, to upend the religious text as far as the age of mankind. There is some sort of effort to suppress the site's excavation. He acknowledged that, yes, some of these trees were indeed planted on top of ancient ruins. He said that I'm going to be banned from the site, that I will be sanctioned. It is a fact that we do not know how the Egyptians constructed the Great Pyramid, but there's still no plan of any kind to explore that hidden chamber. Bro, I say that I don't think the pyramids were tombs, and I have people that hate me for it. You have these stones, whether it's from Egypt and Peru, that are fixed together as if they were laser cut. If they went over the land bridge across North America into South America, why aren't they finding that same DNA in North America? If a pole shift happens and there's a movement inside the Earth, could that cause super volcanoes on the surface? It is impossible, actually, for them to say it's going to be another 1,000 years when they don't know just how quickly it flips once it gets to the point of no return. When the poles flip and the magnetic field diminishes, we are now more susceptible to cosmic impacts as well as sun cycles. But the reality is that, like, it will change the human race. It will be game over as we know it, and it will be a whole new chapter of human history that will start after that. So this is, are you open to something very controversial?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, welcome, man.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm glad we finally connected.
Me too. Yeah, it's been great to get to know you over the last couple of days. So,
yeah, well, it's been a great pleasure. You've been very generous with bringing me out here, and I'm excited to chat. And I enjoyed dinner with you last night with your lovely wife, Crystal, and Ryan. And you guys were very hospitable, and the vibe of the conversation was fun. I knew it would connect well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it was good times to be had for sure, and more good times to be had in over the next couple hours. I'm excited to talk to you.
You bet. And I couldn't be more excited now that I've finally, for the first time, handled these vases.
What do you think, man?
They exceeded my expectations, and to be honest with you, I never thought I'd have the opportunity to even touch one. Yeah. I saw them when I was at the Cairo Museum in Egypt back for the first time in November, December 2020, and you can only see them behind glass vases. And I never thought I'd have the opportunity to touch them. And I remember there was this one vase, and I described it as like an egg shape on the bottom and how it balances on basically just on a point.
Yep.
And you have a few of them here.
Yeah.
And I was blown away to finally touch it. Yeah. And you have a spectacular collection of dozens of them. And it just, like I was saying to you when I was handling them, I'm like, this is greatness. I don't know how they did it. It clearly goes beyond the explanation of bronze chisels or stone hammers. It's clearly evidence of a lost technology of some kind. Like I said before, it doesn't have to be space lasers. But it's something that demonstrates the capabilities of the ancient Egyptians exceed what we were taught in school. And holding them, I'm like, I got goosebumps. I'm like, this is representative of something great in our ancient past that is since lost. And I just feel so privileged and blessed to even be in the same room to be able to touch them. And we got some photos. I'll make sure I blast those out on social media.
Cool.
But wow, I feel like this is something that more people need to be aware of. I'm very grateful for people like Ben Van Kerkwick of the Uncharted X channel and others and Christopher Dunn and you that have done testing and put it out, putting out to the public. And I feel like there's so many people that are still not aware of these things. And as the information and the attention to them grows, I think people will be able to wrap their heads around the concept of lost technology. Like I look at the Great Pyramid of Giza as evidence of lost technology. When you have hundreds of 70 to 80 ton granite stones that were moved from the Aswan Quarry in Egypt 500 miles to the Giza Plateau and then lifted and stacked hundreds of feet above the ground inside the so-called Grand Gallery and King's Chamber. That in itself I consider to be evidence of a lost technology of some kind that they were able to accomplish that, but not everyone sees that. A lot of people look at the pyramids as just, oh, okay, it's a bunch of bricks and stones that were stacked, who cares? A lot of people don't wrap their heads around, but I'm like, when it comes to precision like this, like you and I were saying, like brother, when I'm touching this and feeling these vases, that was not done by hand. It just wasn't. It's too perfect. What was the measurements again? It was more precise than a human hair.
Yeah, one of them has a measurement that varies on the X and Y axis of the lip. The measurement varies by 0.4 microns. And I mean, most of them are in that, I don't know, like a couple of hundredths of a millimeter, which is 3, 4, 5 thousandths of an inch. But yeah, you've got a couple of measurements that are like it's smaller than a bacteria. I mean, it's smaller than a red blood cell is the variance between the dimensions. On the X and Y, it's crazy.
I hadn't heard that analogy before, that example before.
Yeah.
That's even more special than talking about human hair.
Yeah. It's way microscopic, like way microscopic.
The best tattoo artist in the world with the most steady hand could not accomplish that.
No.
Just no. That's right. Just that's not the explanation. This was not done by hand. And when you hold it and you see it firsthand, you get it.
Yeah.
But I think the math on it itself is explanatory. If it's more precise than a human hair and comparable to the size of red blood cells,
right?
It's like, come on, people.
Right.
It's where's the evidence of lost technology? It's here.
There it is.
It's here.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I mean to see some of the explanations of of using a stick with a rock stuck to the end of it, the hollow. I mean, you see how crazy that is now that you actually are able to see these things. And
Matt, please don't be so close-minded. They had time, like we were saying before. Look, if you have lots of time and you don't have Netflix, as Ryan was mentioning, you don't have Wi-Fi, you take the time and you do these things over thousands of years. That's so move on. Let's watch. Can we talk about sports now?
Right.
I don't. Can we edit this portion out?
Right. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. But yeah, they've been fun and opened a lot of people's eyes up, I think, in terms of like what's really going on in our ancient history.
Yeah. I'm curious. How did you get interested in this stuff? I haven't asked you that. We were at dinner last night, and I meant to ask you, but the conversation kept carrying.
Yeah. Ben Van Kerkwick, Uncharted X. Yeah, his videos on it were. I just happened to stumble across one of them and was like, wow. I was just blown away. And I'm kind of a little bit of a all or nothing type of a person. I'd say I wouldn't say an addictive personality, but an all or nothing. And
we share that.
Yeah. So it wasn't just let's get one. It was let's figure out some stuff.
I have to say, Ben makes some of the best video presentations on this topic.
Yeah.
I was blown away when I came across his work a few years ago, and I was so grateful to travel with him to Egypt on a tour back in November, December 2020 during the COVID stuff. And that guy's a smart man.
He is.
And I just love his presentations. He's I told him before, I'm like, bro, you're the best at this.
Yeah, he's great. But you're I've had him on the channel twice now, but I'm excited to have you on for the first time on the channel. And you've your channel Bright Insight is your I guess your social media channels are you're in social media. I mean, you've got X. You're very popular on X, but YouTube, I guess, would you say is your biggest?
Yep, that's where I started. That's where I grew my presence. I'm very proud of the following that I've grown, but I will say, I am definitely not the most knowledgeable in this topic of the ancients. There's people out there that I'm constantly learning, but the one thing I'm proud of is bringing the attention to these topics to people. I found ways to, put these topics on blast and get more eyes and attention to them, and that's something I'm very proud of. And I also look at, because with the following, because I have one of the larger followings out there, and with it comes a lot of support, but it comes a lot of hate, comes a lot of negativity. People know I get a lot of criticism from people in my own field, which I understand. However, I feel like, my experience doing fraud investigations for a retailer, which sounds silly to some people because they're like, oh, he didn't study archaeology. What does he know? I'm like, when you bring in outside eyes with an inquisitive mindset, an investigative mindset, someone that's skeptical, you can kind of start asking and seeing questions that others haven't asked. And, whether it's the issue, and we could talk about it later in the podcast, but whether it's lack of excavations at Göbekli Tepe and the Great Pyramid of Giza's hidden chamber they've discovered, issues at Gunung Padang, I'm noticing, I'm like, especially when it comes to the Göbekli Tepe topic, and we can backburn that later in the conversation if you want, but it's like, what's going on in the field of archaeology? Why is it that the world's oldest and most mysterious sites on Earth aren't being appropriately excavated? Why are they being deferred for future generations? I didn't think we were going to talk about that till later in the podcast, so it's up to you.
I'm good with wherever, man. Yeah, no. Yeah, in terms of order, I'm good. I say we start there.
Okay, yeah. So to anyone that's not familiar, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is considered the oldest ancient site on Earth. It predates Stonehenge by 7,000 years. It's a total mystery. We don't know who built it, we don't know why, and we don't know how. And it was discovered a few decades ago. However, it was formally discovered, let's say, in the archaeological record back in the 90s, let's say. It was discovered a few decades before that. But as far as when, everyone else got involved, and excavation started around 1994, 1995. And I first became aware of it through Graham Hancock on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. And he put that on blast, and the site got international attention. And it's like, whoa, this is not supposed to exist based on what we were taught in school. We were, of course, taught that the Sumerians of approximately 6,000 years ago out of ancient Iraq were the birthplace of civilization. And then this site, Göbekli Tepe, pops up. It's comprised of approximately 200 T-shaped pillars as identified through ground-penetrating radar. Only 72 of them have been unearthed. And my very first video I made on my channel back in 2016, the video, that one was 2017, excuse me. And at that time, I shared what I had heard about it through people like Graham Hancock and others. And I was like, okay, let me backburn this topic for a while, because at that time they said that it was approximately just 5% excavated. And I'm like, okay, this site is super interesting. Let me circle back to this in a few years once more excavations take place, because at that time there was tons of debate. There's something called Pillar 43, which shows a bird holding whether it's a sun, whether it's a comet, whatever it is, it's a ball, and it was highly debated, and it still is today. Like, what is this trying to depict? And when you look at all the pillars, they're all depicting something. They all have images of whether it's animals, and I'm like, okay, Pillar 43 is extremely interesting, and now there's hundreds more pillars waiting to be unearthed. I can't wait to see what these show. So here I am, earlier this year. I'm like, I haven't looked at Göbekli Tepe in a while. Let me revisit the topic. And I was astonished to learn a few things. One of which is that it's still somewhere between 5 and 10% excavated. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hold on a second. 2016 is when they had said that 5% excavated estimate. And I'm like, well, it's 2024. In fact, the latter part of 2024. I don't understand how there's no real measurable difference in the excavations. Now, I did see some sources say that it's still at 5%. And communicating through various archaeologists that have worked at the site on X.com, formerly as Twitter, they've said it's a little more than that. So I'm like, all right, let me give you 10%. But I'm like, what's the holdup? So I started investigating it further.
And it started to be excavated in the early 90s?
1994, 1995.
Klaus Schmidt?
Yep. Klaus Schmidt, the late Klaus Schmidt, German archaeologist, had worked the site until his passing in 2012. And there's been a number of changes at Göbekli Tepe since. So this is getting into the fun conspiracy part of it. So I found articles from the World Heritage Fund describing back in 2017 that the estimate was at 5% excavated. And then I found some other estimates over the last few years still saying 5%, including a person that conducts tours at Göbekli Tepe as recently as just last year saying it's still at 5%. And I'm like, okay, I don't understand how there's no real measurable difference. Let me look into this further. And then I started seeing that the people that work the site, there's a Dr. Lee Clare, who's the head of fieldwork there. And I came across articles saying that, well, actually, let me give a shout out to Hugh Newman, who does tours. He's a brilliant guy. He's an author. He has a book on Göbekli Tepe. And he had communicated to me that they are now going to defer full excavations for future generations, keyword future generations. So I'm like, let me give this a Google and kind of see what's going on here. And sure enough, out of the horse's mouth themselves, straight from the people that work the site and the leaders of it, have communicated that they are rolling back the large-scale excavations of the past. They're going to focus on conservation of the site, and they're going to defer a full excavation for, quote, future generations with an estimate of approximately 150 years before it's fully excavated. And I'm like, I don't understand. This is arguably the world's oldest and most mysterious site on Earth. There's answers waiting to be learned about our ancient past, potentially within whatever's the 90% of it plus that's still buried. I don't understand why this would be deferred. Is it about money? Well, it's not about money. No one at the site has claimed it's about money. And I will say that what I learned was that back in 2016, there's a company called the Vases Group. It's a conglomerate out of Turkey. It's a $1 billion industry made up of 250 businesses, tourism, and all kinds of different things, nothing involving the field of archaeology. And they had announced at the World Economic Forum in Davos back in 2016 that they were doing a partnership with Göbekli Tepe, and they were going to become, quote, the sole partner, of excavation and tourism management of Göbekli Tepe. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Who are these people? And I don't have to get into the conspiracy involving the World Economic Forum. I have correlated a possible connection there because I look at, and we don't have to get, not everyone buys into my World Economic Forum conspiracy theory, but I will say that these people that of the World Economic Forum are very powerful. Klaus Schwab, the former president of the World Economic Forum, has openly bragged publicly. You can watch video of him saying that they've infiltrated various government cabinets around the world and corporations with their global shapers. And I noticed that the CEO of the Vases Group is a longtime member of the World Economic Forum. And I found it particularly interesting that this partnership was literally announced at their annual World Economic Forum meeting in Davos. I'll backburn the WEF stuff for a second because that I can't prove that there's some sort of sinister conspiracy to prevent excavations of the site. All I know is that it's not about funding. It has nothing to do with money. No one has claimed it has to do with money. The only people that has claimed that it has to do with money is just my naysayers that combat me on social media. It says, well, they don't have all the money in the world. I'm like, they can afford to dig this site up. Right. And I should also mention that a lot of archaeologists, not all, a lot of them, interns, like they work for free. Like this is part of like getting their, their PhDs and they go and do field work. But then I started seeing other excuses.
I would go dig there for free. I mean, yes. How many people in the world would go and dig up that site just to learn about it and to be a part of history?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, combining that with the realization that it makes no logical sense on Earth that we wouldn't go dig up the world's oldest and most mysterious ancient site.
It's weird.
It's weird. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Like I was circling back to my point earlier, I might not be an archaeologist, but I do have a business inquisitive mindset, which is that like you as the CEO of a very, very successful company, if you see an issue in your company, you address it. Like, what's the issue and how do we fix this, right? Like, it's very like, what do we have to do? Who has to be involved? What resources do they need? It's not, the problem may be difficult, but identifying the problem and figuring out how to go about it isn't, especially when we're talking about digging up pillars. So let me just say that, like, this is the part that gets me so crazy is that one of their excuses has been to say, and this is from Dr. Lee Clare, the head of fieldwork of the site, says, well, we should probably wait for future technologies to develop so we can safely dig up the site. I'm like, okay, hold on a second. Couple things to be said on this. What magical technological shovel or water hose or whatnot are we talking about here that you are claiming needs to be utilized to dig up pillars that are in the dirt? Number two is, there's been no issue to my knowledge, and I looked into this. They haven't broken any pillars while trying to dig them up. They haven't damaged them. There's been no uproar of like, oh crap, okay, hold on a second. We've had problems excavating the site. We need to dial this back a little bit because this is a precious site that we need to ensure that we take good care of. That hasn't been an issue. But number two is that they are still conducting excavations at Göbekli Tepe. I've made this very clear in every video I've made on it. People have misquoted me to say that Jimmy Corsetti said they stopped excavations. I'm like, I've literally never said that. In fact, I've made it a point to articulate that they are still conducting excavations today. However, it's very minimal. There's no active plan to unearth the remaining So through ground penetrating radar, they estimate there's 200 pillars. 72 have been unearthed. That would mean that there's approximately 128 still under the ground, and there's no plan in place to unearth them. So with that being said, since they're still conducting excavations and now they're throwing out an excuse to say that, well, maybe we should wait for safer technologies to emerge. Are you saying now that what you're doing actively today is unsafe? So you know what I mean? Like, which is it? Like, if you're saying that they need to wait for it to be safer to excavate these pillars, are you also saying that you're doing so today in a way that is unsafe? Which is it? But I don't buy it either way. Right. Like, we absolutely have the technological capability to dig up stone pillars that are buried in dirt. Right. And not to mention, through the use of ground penetrating radar, we've identified what these pillars look like under the ground. Ground penetrating radar itself doesn't necessarily show you exactly what is under the earth if you don't know what you're looking for ahead of time. But now that we do, now that we've unearthed 72 of these and we know exactly what we're looking for, we have the technological capability to know where we're going to dig and for what and what we're going to find underneath it at the site of Göbekli Tepe specifically. So none of this is adding up. And when they talk about 150 years, I'm like, that's 4 or 5 generations in the future, which means no one alive today will be around for the site to be excavated, which I don't understand how anybody with any type of passion for whether it's history or the field of archaeology itself could be content on living the rest of their lives not knowing what's waiting to be unearthed there. It is entirely unacceptable to me, and it should be to every enthusiast of ancient history. There may very well be answers to our mysterious ancient past. There's so much we don't know. We barely know. We know a lot about the Sumerians, but there's a lot we don't know, and that's 6,000 years ago, and this is over 5, almost 6,000 years older than that. Mm-hmm. I just don't understand. So this got me looking into Gunung Padang, which is in Indonesia. Graham Hancock put this on blast in season 1 of Ancient Apocalypse, which, by the way, season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse airs today. It might be live as of midnight a few hours ago. I don't know.
I think you're right. Yeah. I got Graham coming on in 2 days.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, Graham, he and I are going to record on Friday. So
I can't wait. Yeah. I can't wait to see that. Yeah. I can't wait to watch these episodes because all the uproar that came out after season 1, this should be very, very interesting. But he had put Gunung Padang on blast, to the public, to international attention, I should say. And at that site, I started looking into that too, that they had dialed back excavations on that site. And so through the use...
Why? What's the... So quick question of clarity on Göbekli Tepe then, in terms of the total portion of the site that's been excavated is between 5 and 10%, but the percentage of T-pillars that we've excavated, because we know that they're there because of the ground penetrating radar, you said that's like 70 out of 200 or something. So
72, according to the latest. This is according to Dr. Lee Clare, the head of fieldwork of Göbekli Tepe.
So 36% out of 200, is that right?
Correct.
And so 36% of the T-pillars have been excavated. 10% or less of the site's been excavated.
Right.
No explanation as to what is the technology that is non-existent today that's going to be available in 150 years from now. Is there any has there been any what's the magical shovel, or what's the magical brush, or what is it that we're missing?
I'm so glad you asked, because there is no answer to that.
Right.
What's this magical shovel? They have paintbrushes and shovels and pickaxes and water hoses, and there is no explanation. So when you asked why, that is the $1 million question. Now, it seems to me that there is some sort of effort to suppress the site's excavation, because it's not about money, it's not about technology. We have the means, money, and motive to do so, and something has shifted involving the excavations, and it all started once the Doges group took over. Let me again say, WEF conspiracies aside, although I will tie that in to Gunung Padang in a few minutes, because there's a connection there which is even more egregious than the Göbekli Tepe thing. So WEF conspiracies aside, if there's nothing else, let's just look at what runs the world, which is money. So you have this $1 billion conglomerate that comes in and takes over, and they they allocated approximately $15 million up front back in 2017 to construct the various infrastructure for tourism. So that's what they did. They built platforms, viewing platforms, roofing systems to protect the site, and prior to that, Göbekli Tepe was receiving approximately 19,000 something visitors a year, and now it's at about 500,000. So it's become a tourism cash cow. And so if I'm thinking about reasons to not excavate it, it doesn't have to be a vast conspiracy. It could be literally just rich people that invested a few $1,000,000 and they're like, okay, I want my money. And they don't care about what's buried waiting to be found at the site because they already put their millions of dollars in. And they're like, hey, this place is making money. I'm moving on to the next thing. If nothing else, it's that. If nothing else, it's just the people running the show don't have an interest in it. Now, if there was another conspiracy, the site could have significant religious implications, and Turkey is a Islamic country, and the site of Göbekli Tepe and its age could stand, in some people's views, to upend or alter the religious text as far as the age of mankind. So it could be religious in nature, that they don't necessarily want that to come to light. To me, I don't think it debunks anything. That doesn't negate a divine being or anything. It's a touchy subject. And when it comes to religion in itself. But I will say that, going back to Gunung Padang in Indonesia, as far as like a conspiracy itself, they had went from back in 2014, the Indonesian government said that they were willing to allocate, and this is in writing. I've quoted this I've shown screenshots on my videos. They were willing to allocate unlimited funding and resources to excavating the site. And then something shifted there over the last few years where they have stopped excavations. And that's interesting because this site could potentially be 24 to 27,000 years old. Through ground penetrating radar that was analyzed by a notable, prestigious geologist, he's interpreted the data, and he says that there's strong likelihood that there is a subterranean tunnel and chamber underneath the pyramidal structure of Gunung Padang. Whether it is natural or man-made is what's debated. Through his interpretation of the data, and a geologist is the person that would interpret ground-penetrating radar data, he said there's a strong likelihood that it's actually man-made. Now, the naysayers will say it's just a lava tube because the pyramidal structure itself is volcanic in nature, and it could just be a natural lava tube. I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe it is. But we'll never know what it is until we go digging and looking. Mm-hmm. And circling back to the WF, and I'll get off the topic, however, back in 2018, the gentleman that took it over, I forgot his name, but I shared it in my videos. It's a Nassim something, but regardless, it turns, because he's the decision maker now. So let me just say this. The decision maker of what happens involving archaeological excavations at Gunung Padang, that gentleman is a global shaper within the World Economic Forum. And I just find that interesting. With this organization, the WEF, enacting their initiatives around the globe, whether they're the ones that are pushing for the 15-minute cities, they want to get rid of gas-powered stoves and vehicles. These people are no joke. They have initiatives and they're very powerful. The organization of the WF itself is nothing, but what they are is that their people have positions of power throughout the world, whether it's government cabinets and corporations. So I connect the dots on these things and I feel like there's something there, but I could be wrong and I don't know. Like I can tell you, if I don't know, I don't know. All I know is that there's an issue involving a lack of excavations at the most mysterious ancient sites on Earth. So we have Gunung Padang, which could be upwards of 27,000 years old. It might not be, but it could be. Then you have Göbekli Tepe. And then the other one that I've recently come across is that the Great Pyramid of Giza, back in 2016, so 8 years ago, through the use of muon technology, they identified that there is a hidden chamber above the so-called Grand Gallery. The study on it was published in 2017, so that's 7 years ago. And I'm like, okay, I made a video on that as well back in 2017. And I'm like, okay, I'll circle back to this because they said, Zahi Hawass said that it'll be a few years. They want to get an international team to debate the topic and look into it and how to proceed. I'm like, okay, fine. Everything takes time. I'm impatient. I'm like, come on, let's get on this. Let's see what's inside. So I'm like, okay, let me circle back to this after a few years. And I did. And I came across recently that not only have they not gone looking inside of it, but there's still no plan of any kind to explore that hidden chamber. And I'm like, wait a second. As I said a few minutes ago, Göbekli Tepe is arguably the oldest and most mysterious ancient site on Earth. But if there was a number 2, or maybe you could even argue number 1, the Great Pyramid of Giza is so extremely mysterious. We don't know how it is a fact that we do not know how the Egyptians constructed the Great Pyramid. There is nothing but theories and guesswork how it was done. And I could argue that, and many have argued before me, that none of these methods are feasible, whether it's a ramp theory and other things. But who knows? Who knows? What I do know is that the Great Pyramid is highly debated in itself. People argue not just how it was constructed, but they argue, was it a tomb for the pharaohs? Was it a lost technology? Was it something else? So now that there's this hidden chamber, let's just say that the Great Pyramid was built to be a tomb for the pharaohs, which I don't believe for a variety of reasons, and we can get into that. But let's just say that that's indeed what it is, as the archaeologists will say. Oh, okay, there's a hidden chamber. Maybe there's a pharaoh inside there, Matt. Maybe there's answers on how the pyramid was constructed. Maybe there's a lost technology of some kind that answers on how they cut the stone blocks themselves, how they constructed it. Who knows?
Clues to how it was made or something that we can learn about the structure from examining that area.
Answers.
Yeah.
There could be relics and treasures in that hidden chamber, or it could be just an empty room. But inside that empty room would teach us something. Would have a whole new view that has never been seen of the Great Pyramid before, at least since its construction. And we could just look at the walls and be like, oh, okay, this is how they did this. Oh, that's interesting. We would learn something. And since we have the technological capability to go looking inside of it, we could literally drill a half-inch or smaller diameter hole, stick a tube camera through with a light, and we could see what it is.
Right.
This could be done before the end of the week, brother. It really could. Now, let me tell you what the naysayers will say. They'll say, we don't want to damage the Great Pyramid. I'm like, okay, hang on a second. I'm with you. I don't want to damage anything either. However, I can't tell you how many tons or the amount of dynamite and TNT they used to blast their way into the Great Pyramid, but it was significant. Yeah. When you walk into it, you see it. They blasted their way through. They broke the damn thing. The casing stones on the outside have all been removed. Whether it was an earthquake or whatever it was, they're gone. Yeah. It's broken. And we could very easily drill a hole and stick a camera tube and seal that hole afterwards, and everything would be just fine.
Right.
And honestly, whatever answers are waiting to be found inside is reason enough to go looking. I would argue that everyone on earth, every human being, has an inherent right to know about our ancient past. We have a right to know, if there's answers out there, we have a right to know what those answers are, to shed light on where we came from, who we are, what we were doing in ancient times. So again, it is entirely unacceptable to me, and it should be to everyone, to know that there's potential answers waiting to be found and have the means, money, and motive to do so and still not do it. I come back to the question that you asked earlier, which is why? Why? Right. What is going on?
Right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, fascinating stuff. I mean, just to bounce back to Göbekli Tepe for a second, I actually asked Klaus Schmidt's widow to come onto the show and to talk to me because I wanted to get some answers about like what, her thoughts on a lot of the stuff that you mentioned about that. She didn't say she wouldn't come on the show. She said she couldn't come on the show, which I thought was interesting. And, that she can't. She said she can't come on the show. And she didn't explain why or anything, but I thought that was a little bit weird.
Did you follow up? Did you ask why?
I didn't ask her why. No,
right.
I didn't reply to her and ask her why. Yeah. I said I appreciate her time and that she couldn't do it. But that was kind of weird to me. Somebody said that they can't do it.
So it could be out of fear of being barred from the site. For example, Necmi Karul is the top dog of archaeologists within Turkey. He controls the site more than Dr. Lee Clare that I mentioned a couple times earlier. He reports to Necmi Karul. And Necmi Karul is, so he has, back in 2018, I can't remember her name, but the late spouse of Klaus Schmidt, the widow, her name, I can't remember her name, forgive me, but Mrs. Schmidt. She had toured the site following the construction of the tourism infrastructure. And she had posted pictures online that went viral, got international attention of destruction of the site. She herself is an archaeologist that worked alongside Klaus Schmidt there. Not everyone's aware of that. And so she had seen the site before excavations had started, during, and all the way through until the passing of Klaus Schmidt in 2012. And then when she went back there a number of years later in 2018 to be given a tour of the site, she was disturbed. She said that they had literally done the opposite of what they said they were going to do, which is that they indeed laid concrete on top of ancient ruins while building the roads and sidewalk infrastructure. And she was disturbed. And Necmi Karul went back and forth with her on the internet and blasted her. Turns out, and I don't want to talk bad about the guy, but he has a temper. He was charged with threatening to violently harm a fellow archaeologist. It's kind of funny. It's not funny, but it's like, wow. Mm-hmm. And I've been in contact with we'll just call him or her or whoever it is, a whistleblower from Göbekli Tepe. They have an intimate relationship with the site. And these people have been hesitant. They've shared things with me, but they have explained that they want to be anonymous because they're afraid of being banned from the site for life. So if nothing else, it could be that, if she doesn't want to come on to talk about it publicly, because I will say that this Necmi Karul, and I have him quoted in articles referring to me, he didn't call me by name, but he was 100% referring to me in my video, and he made key details about it that was 100% me. He didn't say Jimmy Corsetti, but he said American YouTuber. He mentioned the sponsor of my video. He talked about all the conspiracies and issues I brought to it, and this was just a matter of weeks after my video went on it. That went viral. It got 1.5 million views, and it caused an uproar, and it went viral on Reddit and Twitter and YouTube, and people have been talking about it since, which is something I'm proud of, by the way. I brought attention to the fact they planted trees on top of ruins there. Right. Like, let me mention this. So on top of building roads and sidewalks infrastructure on top of ruins, which Mrs. Schmidt had claimed had damaged the site. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. But then I come to find out, I asked a question in my video, and it was very sincere, and I even said that. This is a sincere question. If you look at Göbekli Tepe from aerial views, there's 4 sets of tree orchards there. I later found out that they're olive tree groves. They were planted by the prior owners of the site, the farmers that owned the land for generations. And allegedly, according to them, they had planted the trees in order to increase the value of the land before selling it. And I'm like, that makes no sense to me. I'm like, Göbekli Tepe in itself is already priceless. If you could auction Göbekli Tepe, what would that go for? Yeah. However, I understand how money works, and I can wrap my head around. I was skeptical at first about that excuse. I'm like, I don't believe this. Really? You're trying to increase the value of the land that's already priceless? It doesn't make sense to me. But I did a little bit more investigation. I'm like, okay, this is actually very possible that it looked like the Turkish government was going to stiff them and give them a low ball, and they would just have to take it. So they planted a bunch of trees on it, olive trees. And it turns out that olive trees are precious in Turkey. In fact, there's something called the olive law enacted in 1935, which makes it illegal to cut down olive trees. And so I'm like, okay, there's 4 sets of tree orchards. Somebody on Twitter had counted them out, and it's almost 800 trees, at least. It could be more than that, but at least 800 trees. And it's illegal to cut them down. And these trees, and this is according to another archaeologist that worked the site, who doesn't like me. He blocked me I was so nice to him. He just blocked me on Twitter. But I got the screenshots. He acknowledged that, yes, some of these trees were indeed planted on top of ancient ruins, which I'm like, okay, when were these trees planted? Okay, 2005 approximately, 2006. It was over a course of time. But that's a full decade after excavations had began in 1994, 1995. So I'm like, okay, if nothing else, this represents an egregious lack of management at the site, incompetence, because it's like, it's one thing to try to get a few dollars extra out of the land, which I can wrap my head around. If people are trying to sell the land and they're trying to take care of their families, I understand it. I don't, condone it, but I can understand. What I don't understand is how it could be, how it was allowed. That again, this is a full decade after excavations began, and then hundreds of trees were allowed to be planted on top of it, and olive trees of all things. So there's some things to be said about this. And forgive me if I'm on my soapbox. You cut me off anytime because I won't stop talking. But Go ahead.
Well, I do. I mean, how much land does the family own? Because if it's just that little square of Göbekli Tepe, then okay, you could see the argument, hey, they're going to plant 800 trees on just that quad. But if they own 20 times that amount of land and they're only putting the trees on top of those exact ancient ruins, then I'm going to call bullshit on
Thank you.
it.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
The site is 22 acres, and those, if you look at those trees, will you zoom in on that a little bit more again, Ryan? Brother, I can ballpark 20 acres, and I'm here to tell you that those trees are covering a vast majority of that site.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you know what 10 acres looks like, you know what 20 acres looks like.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's it's reasonable to say that that's covering a vast majority of the site.
Yeah, I'd guess that's around 6 acres if I'm just guessing based on how much I know about how big that under the tent structure is.
Yeah. Well, let me just say that the site of Göbekli Tepe is documented at 22 acres. However, I can't tell you exactly the portions that we're looking at that make up that 22 acres. So I don't know the answer. Let me just be clear. I don't know.
Gotcha.
What I do know.
I could be wrong too. But yeah, it's in that ballpark.
Right.
Though. Yeah.
All I know is that trees were planted on top of ancient ruins,
Right.
and there's no plan in place to remove them. And here's the thing when it comes to trees. Roots are notorious for destroying what's underneath them.
Right.
If you go to any municipality, you have to have city engineers examine like what trees are going to plant and where. They'll destroy sidewalks and sewers.
But not with a magic shovel. With a magic shovel, we'll be able to clear all that stuff up, right?
This is why my perspective has shifted, and I support these trees. I support magic shovels, and I can't wait for my great-great-great-grandchildren to be alive to witness this being excavated.
Yep.
So,
Amen. Amen.
But let me say this. So, of course, when I made a follow-up video, once I had established that these trees were indeed planted over ancient ruins, I'm like, these roots are going to damage the ruins beneath them. So then this has caused an uproar, which they responded to me. And this is circling back. Let me actually say it because I had forgot my point earlier with Nekmi Kurul and those articles he quoted about me. He said that I'm going to be banned from the site, that I will be sanctioned. And I don't know if that means from the site of Göbekli Tepe itself. I don't know how they can keep me out. But I'm like, does that mean if I land in Turkey at the airport, my visa will be denied and I'll be turned around? He said in the article that I should be sanctioned. And then he followed up in the same exact article saying that I will be. And then I find out through this whistleblower that Nekmi Kurul is a powerful man of political influence within the country. There's pictures of him with the president. Like he's given press conferences. He's no little guy. And I was told from somebody in Turkey that he's a very powerful man. So if he says that I'm going to be sanctioned from visiting the site, I'm inclined to think that that's, I don't know if it's happened or not. How would I know? Well, I want to go to Göbekli Tepe.
Congratulations on the one hand. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
I actually look at it as a badge of honor. I'm like, I put this on blast. I know that I've done a service by bringing attention to this site and the lack of excavations.
Right.
The biggest criticism I've gotten is the WEF conspiracy. I'm here to tell you it might not be true. I don't know. I'm just trying to investigate why it's not being excavated. So let me finish up my point on this involving the trees. They went out and said that these types of olive trees, the roots are going to grow horizontal and they shouldn't damage the site. I'm like, okay. Then I see Dr. Lee Clare, the head of fieldwork, do an interview with Flint Dibble on his Flint Dibble's podcast. And he said something very interesting. He said that because they're making every excuse to say, oh, the trees are going to preserve the site. It's going to keep the soil intact from erosion. And I'm like, first of all, the site has been just fine for the last 11,600 years. Go away with that gaslighting, because that's what that is. All these excuses they made is textbook gaslighting as far as I'm concerned. But then he said something interesting, Matt. He said that they are now actively monitoring the growth of the roots to ensure that it's not damaging the site. I'm like, okay, stop. Which is it? You went from saying that these will not damage the site to now you're actively monitoring them to make sure they're not. It sounds like you're not too confident in that. And then I found, I had a gentleman contact me who had just went to Göbekli Tepe in August, very recently. And we're filming this, October 16th. So this is recent. And he shared videos of these, brother, I saw it with my own eyes. The there are ruins emerging right next to these trees. I'm talking these trees were planted on top of them, literally. And they planted trees in spots where there was clearly ruins. You can see stabbing through the earth. Wow. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? This is some next level incompetence. But the reality is that 100% tells me that those tree ruins, if they just grow horizontal, like they said, because let me just clarify, some olive trees, the roots will grow down, others will grow horizontal. It depends on the species of the olive tree. What I witnessed, and anyone can see it themselves, the videos are out there, these tree roots are going to go straight into those ruins and destroy them. 100%. It's undeniable if you just see it. The trees are planted inches, brother, away from some of these ruins. And if those grow horizontal, it's going to go right through them. End of. Yeah. It's a problem. Yeah. And there's no plan to remove the trees at this time. So
crazy.
Yeah, what the hell's going on?
Right. Yeah. Do you think they found something underground there? Do you think there's like something that they're like, oh shit, we can't, this can't come out to the public. Let's just stop this excavations and let's what do you think? What do you think happened?
I have no proof of that. In short, I don't know. However, going back to my point when it comes to various conspiracies and reasons to not excavate other sites involving religious implications, some others have proposed, and this will sound far-fetched to many, I'll preface it with that, but if you go back to the Bible, one of the first verses after Noah was said to emerge from the ark is that and it's all scholars believe, whether the ark existed or not, if it did exist, it's roundly believed that it would have been in Turkey where the boat had landed following the flood, if that even happened. I'm not pushing that. However, through all legends, it comes from some grain of truth, and it's not unreasonable to suggest, considering the age of Göbekli Tepe being buried approximately 11,600 years ago, which coincides precisely with the younger, driest climate catastrophe of 11,600 years ago. This is documented science. What it was, whether it's a cosmic impact, whatever it was, that's debatable. But something happened in order to cause massive shifts of weather patterns and extinction level events for not total extinction, but various animals had died, hundreds of them went extinct at that same exact period of time. So something happened. And in that verse in the Bible in Genesis where Noah had emerged from the ark, he had said that Noah had built an altar to sacrifice some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird. And what's interesting about Göbekli Tepe, aside from the fact that it's also in Turkey, where, people have said that Mount Ararat is where the ark would have landed, is that all of the pillars, brother, almost, I'm not saying every single one of them, but a vast majority of them are depicting animals and birds. And some have suggested, and I also suggested myself, that what if this is the altar that Noah had constructed? Again, let me be crystal clear. I'm not saying there was a boat that had every animal on earth or something like that. I'm not saying there was a flood that covered every inch and every mountain on earth. What I am saying is that there was an event that happened at that same period of time, and the fossil record shows that there was, like, for example, was like 75% of all animals in North America had died off at that same exact period of time. So something happened. And so to circle back to answer your question is, it's possible it has religious implications. If there was something about Göbekli Tepe that corroborated the Bible in an Islamic country, brother, I'm here to tell you, it doesn't have to involve money or the World Economic Forum or anything else. It could literally just be a religious implication thing. And I think that is very reasonable to suggest. So whether they found something, I have no idea. I just don't know. What I do know is that they are not doing their full-scale, large excavations of the past, and they have deferred that to future generations, and it is outside the time limit of any of our lifetimes of anyone listening right now. And that makes no sense. So I don't pretend to have all the answers. I don't know what the answers are. All I know is that there is clearly a problem in the archaeological community. It doesn't involve archaeologists, because I have so many archaeologists think that I hate them. I'm like, that is the furthest thing from the truth. I don't dislike archaeologists. That's nonsense. I want to work with them. I love what they're doing. I can learn a lot from them. However, the decision makers, the powers that be, those that can flick their wrist to sign off on the decision to go fully excavate it, something has happened, something has shifted, and it's no longer happening. And it's unacceptable. It's intolerable. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
What the hell's going on?
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great take. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, it could very well be religious, or it could, who knows, I guess, but it would sure be nice to know.
You are a businessman.
Yeah.
You're the chief executive officer of a large company. What comes to your mind as a possible, with these issues? Is there anything that I'm not thinking of? Does any of this sound reasonable? Is there anything else, possible explanation that would make sense? That's benign. It's like, I'm not saying there's a sinister agenda to prevent Göbekli Tepe from being excavated. It's just not. Is there anything that comes to mind from your lens?
Not from a business standpoint, just from maybe the standpoint of maybe these people found something that they can't explain, that doesn't fit into the narrative that we're told about our history, that people were supposed to have known about, or people were supposed to, it's just that could be something else. If it's religious, that I hadn't even considered that. That makes total sense. But what if, Pillar 43, for example, depicts a scene that may actually show the Younger Dryas cataclysm, and maybe there's other pillars that they found that are depicting kind of scenes that we can't explain and that we can't put into the official narrative of our history. And that would be the only other thing that I would think, that would be like a reason for being like, the world's not ready for this yet,
That's a very good idea, because there is absolutely tremendous pushback involving ancient cataclysms.
Right.
It's so taboo within the archaeological and historical community. They don't even want to entertain it. Yet we have scientific data that corroborates that it happened. For example, and I've heard this from many other people like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, people I deeply respect, point out that there was something called Meltwater Pulse 1b at that same period of time of the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, approximate 400 to 420 foot rise in global sea levels that was far more sudden than anything than was thought possible. It's reasonable to suggest that it's related to the rapid ending of the ice age and the melting of the North American ice caps, flooding the oceans, which is what I think this flood narrative involving Noah's Ark comes from. That if you look at the fact that I think it's like 40% of the world's population lives on or within 100 kilometers or 60 miles of a coastline. So considering that there are literally hundreds, I've seen estimates, reliable estimates from anthropologists saying that there's at least like 250 to 500 cultures around the world spanning 5 continents that discuss a legend of a flood. That tells me something happened. Again, it doesn't mean that the flood had to cover Mount Everest and the Peruvian Andes. However, if there was an event that caused a sudden and rapid rise in global sea levels, that would have been apocalyptic, so to speak, for ancient people living on or near a coastline. And it is not a coincidence that so many cultures have this legend.
Yeah,
Something happened. Something happened.
Yeah. Do you think that event from that time period, 11,600-ish BC, around that time, do you think that's when these sites of Göbekli Tepe were supposedly intentionally buried? Do you think that some catastrophe could have buried these things, or do you buy that these were intentionally buried?
I think that they were intentionally buried, and let me say there's a few reasons why. Klaus Schmidt himself, who worked the site, was certain that it had been. And then when I look at photos of the excavation process, and you look at the strata involved, it looks like it. So there's, besides all the dirt, there's countless stones, small stones, and all the pillars are found immersed in these stones. And it tells me that if these pillars aren't damaged, like let's just say it was natural, it was a flood of some kind, some sort of mud
yeah.
That would have destroyed and knocked over and broken those ruins, just like we've seen in other parts, like relics in ancient Iraq. I've seen, like when something happens, the earth will destroy ruins. You can see this in so many places around the world where they find ruins buried and things are destroyed. Göbekli Tepe isn't that. And these pillars were seemingly encased in earth, not from a flood, but like it. What I'm trying to tell you is that it does look like it was intentionally buried.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers, but like it seems to me that it was something intentional rather than natural.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
I bet money on it.
Yeah. Let's pop back over to Egypt and the North Africa region real quick. And I got a question to ask, just maybe close the loop on the Great Pyramid really quickly and that internal structure on the Great Pyramid. Ryan, can you pull up the Great Pyramid's internal chambers?
Oh yeah.
Real quick. I guess I'm curious as to the Grand Gallery, from what I've seen, appears to end directly over the Queen's chamber prior to going into the supposed King's chamber.
Right. It's right before it, directly before it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And is it directly on top of the Queen's chamber? Is it the Grand Gallery? If you draw a straight arrow straight down, are you going to hit the Queen's chamber?
Over part of it. So this is an excellent illustration. It shows that the end of the Grand Gallery goes right over the heart of the middle of the Queen's chamber, which is below it. So to answer your question, yes.
Yeah. And that's so now I'm wondering about this other big void, which I've also seen. This image is showing the big void being flat, horizontal, but I've also seen it in the same angle as the Grand Gallery. So I'm wondering if the Grand Gallery could be some method for constructing the Queen's chamber, or those big rocks that sit on top of the Queen's chamber that disperse the weight off to the sides. And if this void could end over the King's chamber, and could be how they got all those massive granite megalithic blocks to kind of go on top of the King's chamber, potentially like a second Grand Gallery, but for construction purposes.
Very possible. And I should mention this. So this image that we're looking at here is from 2017, and there's been an update since, which is, and I'm not saying you'll find an illustration, I haven't seen one, but they went from thinking that the void was 30 meters in length to now 40 meters in length. So it's even larger than the so-called Grand Gallery. Mm-hmm. And yeah, perhaps so what many people have suggested is that it is a second Grand Gallery, because the interpretation of the data is that it was sloped, but they're not 100% sure. The Muon technology only allows us to understand so much about it. What they know is an approximate size and shape to it. It's rectangular in nature, and it's entirely feasible that it is just a second so-called Grand Gallery as far as the structure itself. But going back to your point, like, could it have been used to get those massive stones into the top above the so-called King's chamber? I always like to use so-called because I don't think it was a King's chamber. But and that is even more reason why we need to go looking into this, because it doesn't have to have a mummy. It doesn't have to have ancient artifacts of gold or what have you. It could be as simple as just the nature of the void itself could be the proof that we need to say, this is how they likely moved those 70 to 80 ton granite stones above the King's chamber. Because I should mention, I believe it's 129, don't quote me on this, granite stones that make up the so-called Grand Gallery and the King's chamber, the large granite stones that were hauled 500 miles from Aswan. And it is inexplicable how the Egyptians got those hundreds of feet above ground level. And if it's some sort of sloping thing, perhaps, I'm referring to the hidden chamber, there could be answers in there that show, this is how those stones were brought up there. And it's, again, like I already said, it's all that more reason to go looking. We're going to learn something about that. Even if it's an empty room with no answers on how anything was constructed and there's nothing in it, it's just a big empty room, we're going to learn something.
Exactly. Right,
Yeah. We'll see something we hadn't been seeing. And honestly, with the massive rise in popularity of this niche topic involving the mysteries of lost ancient civilizations, they could turn that into a pay-per-view event. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Bro, I would pay money to watch the first images emerging of what that Grand Gallery or that void is And so many millions of people around the world would take part in it. It'd be a special event.
No
it
doubt.
doesn't matter if there's nothing found in it. It would be cool. I just want to see what it looks like. It would be special. The whole world could listen. One of the things that surprised me when I got into the realm of lost ancient mysteries is I was surprised to see how controversial and divisive it is. Lots of opinions. It's almost religious in nature, in that you have, bro, I say that I don't think the pyramids were tombs, and I have people that hate me for it. It's pretty wild. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But this is something that could unite people. We all, archaeologists and historians and alternative ancient theorists such as myself alike, I believe all would like to know what's inside that chamber. So in a world that's so divisive and getting more divisive, people just want to fight over everything now. If you don't believe that, go on Reddit or Twitter or YouTube comments and you'll see it. And this is just one little thing that we could just unite on and be like, okay, do we all want to see what's inside the chamber? I know the answer is yes. I can speak for everybody.
Right.
That we would like to see what's in it. And so it's like, why don't we just chase that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Everybody, even the people that think that it's a tomb, you know, that like maybe there's a pharaoh in there. Maybe for the first time we can find a pharaoh in this void, you know? Or so.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's like, okay, aside from how the pyramid was built, the only thing more debated than that is whether it was a tomb for the pharaohs or not. And you have people like myself and many others that do not believe that it was built to be a tomb for the pharaohs. If they simply went into that chamber and found a pharaoh, I would shut up with my, I would be like, okay, I was wrong. This was a tomb. And all the controversy that angers archaeologists and historians so much about the debate on whether it was a tomb or not, why don't we just end that debate now?
Yeah, seems
potentially end it.
Easy. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that sarcophagus in the so-called King's Chamber, I call it so-called as well. Yeah. Luke Caverns was on the show, and he pointed out to me that sarcophagus is kind of garbage, like compared to a lot of even the boxes that you find out in the middle of the desert and some of the more primitive burials and tombs. Like, they're much thicker walls. They have a really nice lid that goes onto them, super heavy. And he pointed out, like, you couldn't even get the lid out of because the sarcophagus is bigger than the doorway, so there was never a lid in there. And it's like, if this is really the greatest pharaoh of all time, why have this little crappy sarcophagus in this little room for him?
It's such an excellent point. So I am blessed that I've been to Egypt 3 times, and I've been inside the so-called King's Chamber twice, and been in the box laid in it twice. And it is undoubtedly the shoddiest. If it was a sarcophagus, it's the worst one I had seen. And I'm not exaggerating. I had been to the Cairo Museum. I've been to various, I've been in the other pyramids. I've been in, thank you for the photo, Ryan. It is can I swear on here?
Yeah.
It's a piece of shit in comparison to all the other ones. I can hear Ryan laughing. It is the worst one I had ever seen. And out of all places, the Great Pyramid, you would think, if that was a tomb for the pharaoh, would have the best, or at least a comparable sarcophagus to the other ones. It's thin, it's shoddy, it looks like it was carved with a rake on part of the inside. I mean, I'm not saying it's not finished on parts of it, it is, but like, it's just flimsy, and it's just something about it is, well, everything about it is not comparable to all the other sarcophagus that you see elsewhere.
Right.
And it's bizarre.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder what the true purpose was of the Great Pyramid. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you have any opinions? What you think?
The true purpose of it?
Yeah.
I don't. I'm open to all the theories. I'm open to the tomb. I just put percentages on things.
Yeah.
I don't take anything to 100 or 0. I just try to stay open. Even to religion, I don't take it to 0. But in terms of that, I think Chris Dunn's theory actually makes some sense. I think the tomb theory is fine. I think, Luke had a water pump theory that I think is something that it should be. We can talk about that one. I think it's worthy of exploration. Or just. But I don't know. I think that the land of Kim, That one is
Jeff.
Yeah, that one's pretty interesting too in terms of like having them be different chemical processing plants. That's super interesting.
I'm open to all ideas. I do firmly believe that the Great Pyramid of Giza was a functional infrastructure of some kind. I don't know what. I really identify with Christopher Dunn's theory that it was a power plant of some kind. I don't know that. It's just that when I look at the world's largest structures we make today, like hydroelectric dams, if they were to construct something so large, and knowing that the Nile River once flowed virtually up to the steps of the Great Pyramid, they found boats buried next to the Great Pyramid, literally. And it's actually established science that the Nile the Nile River was 8 miles closer to the pyramid than it is today. And so it's not unreasonable to suggest that they were flowing or pumping water through it whether it was a power plant or something else, whether it was, and this gets in more wild things, a DNA restoration thing, because you look at these legends around the world about ancient humans living to be hundreds and even thousands of years old. Some people have suggested that these sarcophagus were actually some sort of DNA restoration devices that prolonged longevity. That's a wild concept to many people. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm just simply saying that when you go through the pyramid, the internal structure and layout of itself is so bizarre. It looks absolutely nothing like any other tomb we've ever found in Egypt. And there's no hieroglyphs in it.
That's weird.
And let me say, it is weird. Yeah. And let me say this. A lot of people who haven't, or that are not familiar with the internal structure and layout of the Great Pyramid, they have always assumed that it was like this maze, this puzzle to hide the pharaoh from tomb robbers. But it's not like that at all. Bro, when you go in, you go down and you go up and you're inside. And that's it. Now, say the Valley of the Kings. Known tombs, decorated from floor to ceiling, literally, in countless hieroglyphs. And they're beautiful. And there's tombs in them. And this looks nothing like it. And the only other explanation I've heard on why the Great Pyramid is a tomb but doesn't have the hieroglyphs is because, that's just simply because the Egyptians didn't start doing hieroglyphs of tombs until after that. Hey, listen, that's a lazy excuse. I don't know the answer, so I'm not here to say that they're wrong, but I am here to say that it doesn't add up. And thank you, Ryan, for bringing in these photos. I will say, and this is something worth mentioning, and this is I'm a woo-woo guy. I'm a very spiritual man. I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. I believe that we're a product of creation. And there are vibes in certain places. There's some places that for whatever reason you feel better in than others. Maybe it's just a feng shui thing, which is real. How you decorate a place can make you feel good or not. Let's be real. Every time I've been inside the pyramids of Giza, it feels good. And it's not just because I want to be there and I was excited to be there, because when I went to the Valley of the Kings, brother, I was excited to go. I couldn't wait. And by the time we were done there, I couldn't wait to get the hell out. It had a terrible feeling to it. I don't know how to describe it. It didn't make sense. And there was one other site in Egypt I felt the same way. Actually, let's say two, but let me start with the first one, which is what's called the Osiris Shaft. It's in the Giza Plateau, located directly between the Sphinx and the second pyramid, as I call it. It's 100 feet down. You go through multiple shafts to get to the bottom. And I was so excited to go in there. And bro, I dipped out early. I left before the third, we could be in there for over an hour or whatever it was. And I dipped out at 28 minutes. I know this because you're not supposed to record in there. But what I did was I put my cell phone on record and I put it in my front pocket and I record the whole thing. So that's how I know I was in there for 28 minutes. Nice. And I wanted to get the hell out. I don't know how to describe it. It just felt weird in a not great way. And I felt that there. I felt that at the Valley of the Kings. And then I felt it a little bit in the Cairo Museum. And as it was explained to me by Yusuf Awiyan, who led the tour, he said, when you get all these different artifacts in one spot, the energies shift and it becomes something different from what those energies would have been by themselves. And again, this is woo-woo. I don't expect anyone to buy into it. My point is this, and I'll share another story with you too if you want. This is a fun story. But the pyramids of Giza felt good. and the other places that were known tombs felt bad. And I don't know how to I don't know what to make of it. But do you want to hear a story?
Yeah, man, let's do it. Yeah.
So
It makes total sense to me. I'm a very
Yeah.
spiritual and energy sensitive person, so it makes total sense, and can't wait to get out there and feel that for myself.
I want to go to Egypt with you. I want to see you experience it and see your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
But so I don't want to do the name dropping thing, but I have to point out this story because there's something to be said for it, and I have his permission to share it. So there's a notable retired UFC fighter named George St. Pierre. He's considered the GOAT. Many consider him the best of all time. Some people say John Jones, but it doesn't matter. They're both very comparable, and his accomplishments are through the roof. And he has a shared interest in ancient civilizations, which is one of the most fun things about this realm, is that you see how it brings so many people of different walks of life that share these interests. You, all kinds of people. It's like there's a growing niche of this interest. Mm-hmm. And he's someone that shares it. And we had connected, and I had the privilege of traveling with him to Baalbek in Lebanon and then Egypt back in September of last year, 2023. And I went into the king's chamber with him, and he laid in the stone sarcophagus, and Yusuf did the Om, I can't do it, in the box. And it's wild because the reverberations off the granite, it literally vibrates. You'll feel it vibrate. It's like nothing I've ever felt before. And he did it for a good minute. And George St. Pierre, who has been retired for several years now, who's not coming out of retirement because he's very smart, he's been successful, and he has a family, he wants to protect his brain. He doesn't, he has a very logical, even though he's been tempted to want to compete again because it's such a high. So what I witnessed is that when he got out of the box following the Om, his eyes were wide. And he looked right at me, he says, and I'm going to butcher his accent. He's French-Canadian. Jimmy. No, he didn't say Jimmy. He says, I'm coming out of retirement. I'm going to win the championship. That was his very first reaction.
Wow.
Out of coming out of that box.
Wow.
And I'm like, there's something to be said for that. That when you have someone that many consider to be the greatest of all time of what he did, a champion, a multiple time champion, it's something so spectacular, such as fighting, which is as primal as it gets. And that was his first reaction. And so fast forward a few hours later, I'm at the hotel pool with him. I'm like, hey, George, so you said something to me. I'm curious. Yeah. I said, you said you were coming out of retirement. And this wasn't in the context of him doing a grappling match, which he was thinking about doing at that time. This was in the context of going back to reclaim the championship to prove he could do it. And he's like, no, Jimmy, I'm not coming out of retirement. And I was like, what made you feel that way in that moment? And he's like, I don't know. He said, it's just how I felt. In that moment, I felt hot. He didn't use the word high, but I'm paraphrasing. He said something about how good he felt. And I'm like, there's something about that resonates with me. I don't know what to make of it. But the fact that was his reaction coming out of there, and the fact that the vibe in that place is so special, it just makes me wonder what the true purpose was. It just makes me think it wasn't a tomb. Not for those reasons. For other reasons, I think it wasn't a tomb. Besides the fact they never found a single mummy in any pyramid ever in Egypt. That's a fact. The fact that you have no hieroglyphs in them. The only exception, so I've always said that there's no pyramid in Egypt that has any hieroglyphs. And some have disagreed with me, said that's not true. The pyramid of Unas, which I think is in Saqqara, I believe. Forgive me if I'm getting that wrong. I've been to so many. When you go to 24 places in Egypt, you can get them confused. But the pyramid of Unas has hieroglyphs on the walls. However, there's a detail that when people disagree with me, they leave out a key detail, which is that those hieroglyphs are not carved into the granite that makes up the internal structure of that little pyramid. It was all on plaster that was on it, and it's all falling apart now. And to be completely honest, those hieroglyphs too look like complete shit compared to the hieroglyphs you see carved into granite elsewhere. It was done on, thank you, there we go. And this is beautiful, it's spectacular, but just so we're clear, all of those glyphs are carved into plaster, not into the stone itself.
Right.
And you can actually see it in the upper right-hand corner where you see the different, the separate two massive stones. That's the granite. And that gap that you're seeing there is just the removed plaster that's fallen off over time.
Okay.
So all those glyphs are on top of plaster.
Okay.
And it's not comparable. And honestly, this site is not even remotely comparable to the beauty of the Valley of the Kings. But that would be the one exception. I just point this out because if I say there's not one single pyramid in all of Egypt,
Somebody's going to say that.
Well, they always that's what they do. Like, that's incorrect. It's the Pyramid of Unas. I'm like, okay, hang on a second.
Yeah.
You could say that that shoddy plaster was put in after that thing was constructed, perhaps. Maybe. But it's little details like this that matter, because when people try to debunk, you got to check the debunkers. And I'm like, that's not accurate to say that was so. Yeah.
Let's move over to, we're already in North Africa with Egypt. Let's talk a little bit more about North Africa and get over to the Richtat Structure. You've done some incredible work with that, with your video on Atlantis and the connections between the Richtat Structure and Atlantis. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
And thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. That's definitely what put me on the map, is discussing the Richtat Structure, which is more commonly known as the Eye of the Sahara or the Eye of Africa. And the tying it to the Atlantis theory, like I said, is pretty much what put me on the map. That's what caused my channel to really take off. I was growing, but it really took it to another level. And
Ryan, can you pull it up on the screen for us? Just pull up my iPad.
So I had learned of this theory from a little known documentary called Visiting Atlantis, which was made in 2011. And it was on the Gaia network behind a paywall. And back in 2018, I decided to start investigating the topic of Atlantis. And I'll leave that up and I'll start talking about that in a second, but I want to share the story behind how I came across this. So I started looking into the topic of Atlantis in 2018, and there was this little known documentary called Visiting Atlantis by a George S. Alexander and a Natalis Rosen. And I was blown away. It was sharing this site that I had never heard of before. Like you said, you had heard of the Richtat Structure, but at that time, most people hadn't. And I point that out because when I made the first video on it, I had thousands of comments of people saying, how have I never even heard of this before? And there's a picture of it here on screen, the Richtat Structure. And this site is massive. That's about 16 miles across. It's huge. You can only appreciate it from aerial or from space. And so I saw this documentary, and it pointed out the similarities of Atlantis, which was that it was said to be made up of concentric circles, specifically 3 that would be of water, 2 of land, which matches the Richtat. The Richtat also has an opening at the south, which was what Atlantis described, mountains to the north with rivers flowing through them. And as I did more and more research on the topic, and as I made videos on it in the years following, I've added significantly to the theory, 3 or 4 times as many bullet points, line items of evidence, as I would call it, that suggest that this is by far the most likely location for the lost capital city of Atlantis. And keyword capital. Atlantis was said to be an empire made up of 10 kingdoms. And I'm focusing on the capital because it was something so specific. And I should mention this, and I've said it before, but new people listening haven't heard it before, is that the legend of Atlantis actually comes from the ancient Egyptians, which a lot of people are not aware of. And it was Plato's distant relative Solon, who was said to have traveled to Egypt 2,600 years ago and visited Sais, or the Temple of Neith in Sais, Egypt, or is it the Temple of Sais in Neith, Egypt? I'm getting it backwards in this moment, but I'm tired, forgive me. Regardless, so at that time, Egypt was a hub of learning, and people had traveled from all over to go there for wisdom. And that's where Solon, who is said to be the wisest of the 7 sages, he was a Greek philosopher and poet and law and statesman, and he had had this temple, which it no longer exists. It was consumed by the Nile River like 1,000 years ago or something. But at that time, 2,600 years ago, is when they had described, the Egyptians described that they were colonists of this lost civilization that was destroyed in a cataclysm. And what's interesting about that, and I would say that this is evidence, strong suggestive evidence that say that Atlantis actually existed, from the standpoint that when you look at the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe of 11,600 years ago, which we talked about earlier in the podcast, well, the priest had told Solon that it had the civilization was destroyed 9,000 years prior. And what's interesting about that is that 9,000 years prior to 2,600 years ago is 11,600 years ago. What an astonishing coincidence, especially considering that it was said to be consumed by a flood of some kind at the same time when the Meltwater Pulse 1b had happened. So to me, I'm like, this is evidence that this site actually existed. Now, as far as the Richtat structure goes, I'm a very open-minded individual. I don't claim to have been the first person to have shared this theory. I've credited where I've heard it many times before. I am proud to have brought it so much attention, as well as built on top of the theory. And the more I've researched it, the more compelling it is. For example, you see all those white blemishes here on screen?
Right.
That's salt.
Right.
And what's interesting is that all the areas of the highest concentration of salt are all at the areas of the lowest elevation.
Yep.
And anybody can check this on Google Earth, because if you put the mouse cursor over, it'll tell you the elevation. And indeed, in fact, I had a buddy, Josh Sigurdsson of World Alternative Media, that traveled out there a couple months after my video, and he literally tasted the salt off the ground himself. Now, I think that's strong suggestive evidence that seawater had settled and later evaporated there. Of course, the critics will say that's not true. This is just salt coming out of the desert. But I'm like, there's so many issues with that, because I'm like, okay, well, I live in Arizona, and there's many places around the world that are nothing like this. And so other people will say that this site is, well, just a volcanic anomaly. It's a collapsed dome, so therefore it's not Atlantis, because Atlantis was said to be made by Poseidon. I'm like, well, who is Poseidon? If you Google Poseidon, the ancient Greek translation for Poseidon was god of the earth, god of the oceans, I think god of horses as well. But I interpret that as to mean Mother Nature. Because, again, Poseidon was meant to be, or I mistranslated, Lord of the Earth. So I'm like, that sounds like a modern day translation for Mother Earth. And, so who is Poseidon? Was it an actual gentleman that went and dug this site up? So I would actually say that the fact that it is a natural feature makes it just as likely to be Atlantis, and that us humans build on natural anomalies all the time. But to go on to the line items of evidence that make this so compelling is that besides the concentric circles, which the Richtat has, not only that, 3 specifically that would be of, if there's water in this, you had 3 rings of water and 2 of land, which matches Atlantis. An opening to the sea at the south. So if you pan out just a smidgen, Ryan, you see that to the lower left? You can scroll in a little bit more. You don't have to go out so far. But that opening is southerly facing.
Here, you mean, right?
Yep, out a little bit more down to the left. Right there, boom.
Okay.
That right there is southerly facing. And not only that, you could see that it looks like water had flowed through it. And if you were to pan out further, and you don't have to do it just yet, but there are ripples in the sand that match what Randall Carlson had described with being evidence of catastrophic fluvial erosion. Yeah, go to the left right there. Yeah. Boom. Mm-hmm. So Randall had done a brilliant job of describing, so that's bedrock with sand mixed in between them, and the white areas are salt. Mm-hmm. But those darker blemishes are indeed bedrock. And they measure 3 to 4 times larger than what you see in the scablions of eastern Washington, which is known, confirmed science of catastrophic flooding.
Right.
Now, Randall Carlson himself, who I deeply respect and has learned so much from him, he does not think that this site is, that's even a better example. Wow. Yeah. He doesn't think that it's Atlantis. However, he does corroborate that this is evidence of at least one event, possibly multiple events of catastrophic fluvial erosion. And again, just to clarify, because some people say, these are all sand dunes. It's both. There's sand that's intermixed between whatever carved out that bedrock. And when you look at, like, from there, it looks like ripples that you would see in sand at the beach.
100%. Yeah.
And
I mean, water, it very much looks like water went through here.
Yeah, I firmly believe that it did. That's an excellent example too.
Yep.
And so there's other line items of evidence about this site. For example, Atlantis was said to have an abundance of gold, so much so that their outer walls were cased in it or coated in it. And it's a little known fact, but prior to the discovery of gold in North America, Europe got their gold from Mauritania. And there's the 1851 treaties of ancient resources of Mauritania that say that. I was astonished to find this a few years ago. Atlantis was also said to have an abundance of of elephants along with the gold. Also, and you won't be able to tell through the satellite imagery, but Atlantis was said to be made up of red, black, and white color stone, which matches the Richtat. When you go on the ground, and I have so many photos of this because there's other people that have been there. Let me give a shout out to David Stig Hansen, who's been there 3 times. He's my friend. He's a great guy. And it's red, black, and white color stone. Furthermore, because a lot of people will say that, oh, well, this can't be Atlantis. Atlantis was said to be an island, which is a key point that Randall makes to say that it's not the site. However, if you look into the ancient Greek translation for the word island, the word was Nessos and Nesson, which turns out has 5 different translations, one of which is island, but the other is peninsula, promontory, as well as land within a continent surrounded by lakes, rivers, or springs, which is highly fascinating. Another detail is that Atlantis was said to have springs of hot and cold water. And, well, it turns out that the Richtat structure itself is scientifically described as a hydrothermal anomaly. So that's interesting. I'm not saying there's springs of water flowing through it today. But when I'm on the topic of water, Atlantis was said to have a mountain to the north. And if you go north to Morocco, pan out and then go north, that whole area you're seeing there, it's hard to tell, but that's a mountain chain, and or further to the north, but it's called the Atlas Mountains. And Atlas was the very first king, said to be the very first king of Atlantis. And it shares the same exact name. And not only that, at the time of Atlantis, 11,600 years ago, the Tamanrasset River flowed from the Atlas Mountains either through the Richtat or directly north of the Richtat out to the Atlantic Ocean. And that's a fascinating detail because the Tamanrasset River dried up approximately 5,000 years ago. And a detail, although I've put it on blast and so have many others in the years since, but a little known detail is that the Sahara Desert was a lush green tropical paradise up until approximately 5,000 years ago. It's debated how that happened. Some say it's the Earth's precessional cycle. Regardless, see, there's the Tamanrasset. Flowed directly from the Atlas Mountains. You can see the Atlas Mountains are illustrated on the map. And it flowed, as you can see through the map, it flowed right through the Richtat, or at least north of it. And that's how Atlantis was described. Mountains to the north with a river flowing from the mountains. And I just find that detail of Atlas, it's just so specific. I'm trying to think of some of the other line items of evidence.
There's a lot in your videos. I mean, it's like boom, boom, boom. I mean, you just hit like one after the other after the other. It's incredible how many like similarities.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And I will say this, because I know that people listening, there's some people who will never believe that Atlantis existed. I know that there's people who do think that Atlantis existed, and if it did, it was not the Richtat. I will say that if nothing else, the Richtat structure being such a spectacular, incredibly unique feature, unlike anything else found anywhere else on Earth, is worthy of scientific study and consideration. I will also say this, though. They call it the Eye of the Sahara for a reason, and it looks like an eye. And this point I'm about to make, some people laugh at me about, but when you look at the Eye of Ra or Horus, from Egypt, it does look a lot like the Richtat. I'm not saying that it is. People go on me on this one, but it is interesting. And the reason I point that out is because if the Egyptians said that they were colonists, survivors of the destroyed place called Atlantis, the fact that Egypt as well as the Eye of the Sahara are both in the Sahara is very interesting, especially when you consider the fact that the Sahara was green at that point in time. It had one of the largest network of rivers ever known to exist in Earth's history. It'd be number 11, I believe, of all time. Massive. The largest freshwater lake in all of known human history was Mega Lake Chad, which is located obviously in modern day Chad. That existed at that same period of time. There's various scientific studies that corroborate that the Sahara at the time that it was green would have been I shouldn't use the word densely, would have been populated by people and would have been used for migration and other things, which is obvious. I mean, if it's a green, people travel where it's hospitable. And there's numerous scientific studies that say that humans had lived there. They're doing LiDAR from space, and they're constantly discovering new ruins, mysterious ruins, out in the Sahara that they don't know who they belong to or when. Mauritania itself has these ruins, inexplicable, dating back a few thousand years, I should say, 5,000 years. But they don't know who made them. And so it's very mysterious in itself. And I do consider that the Richtat is by far the most likely location for the lost capital city of Atlantis. It's just so compelling. It doesn't, again, I'm open-minded. I know that I don't know, but I know that it's worthy of further study and consideration. Other people will say, like Randall, that it was the Azores. And I would say, if Atlantis is said to be a kingdom or empire made up of 10 kingdoms, what's to say that the Richtat wasn't simply the capital and the other in the Azores are the other locations? So I think my honest opinion is that all these sites need to be excavated or investigated and explored and researched further, because it's a win-win. Atlantis to me is a harmless topic, although it's very hotly debated. But
people are very anti. There's this whole group of people that are like, no, impossible. There's no, and then there's people that are open-minded to the possibility of it. But it's like, if so the story for so long was that we were hunter-gatherers, but then you find Göbekli Tepe from the exact same time period.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
And it's like if that was that 11,600 years ago in that time period, and easily, and this was green and fertile until 5,000 years ago, of course there could have been people living here. Of course we're going to find evidence of of a lost, you can call it what you want. You can call it a civilization. You can call it just whatever you want. But people were were in this part of the world. I mean, undoubtedly.
When I said that, I'm so glad you brought this up. It's because when it comes to Göbekli Tepe, they will say that it's not evidence of a civilization. They debate the word civilization.
Sure.
And they still say it was done by hunters and gatherers. I'm like, no. I do not think, I'm not saying, because they'll say that, well, we don't have evidence of farming at Göbekli Tepe. We don't have evidence of human habitation. I'm like, you have the structure itself. It doesn't mean they lived in it, you sillies. It was built by a civilization. That was not built by a bunch of people that were bored. It's too sophisticated.
Yeah.
It's argued, although debated, that it was, what's the word? What I'm looking for here? That I'm losing my train of thought. Forgive me, brother. This is what happens when I think about too many things at once.
Like a ceremonial?
Okay. Okay, I got it. That it was orientated to the cosmos. That had a celestial origin to it. That's debated. I don't know the truth of it, but when you look at the circular nature of it, it's specific. It means something. They didn't just be like, let's just do this here, and it's multiple circles. So it's clearly something. And I don't think for a second it was created by primitive hunters and gatherers. We're talking 20-ton stones, 20 to 25 tons, or maybe upwards of 30 tons. I might be getting that backwards, but upwards of 20 feet tall, and again a couple hundred of them. So yeah, getting away from like the debate on the definition of the word civilization. It's something, and now that we're looking at the Richtat here on screen, if you bring up, if you were to go to Google Images, Ryan, and just type in Richtat structure from space, it is so obvious that it was blasted by the ocean. And this is something, another point that's worth mentioning. It looks like it was blasted by the ocean. And here's something that's so significant to discuss, which is that the last time the Sahara Desert was said to have been, had the ocean over it, was at the time, and Ryan, I'd appreciate it if you brought this up too, type in Trans-Saharan Seaway. This is an incredibly important detail. So notice this. It does not illustrate it going west over the Richtat. However, if you were to go to satellite imagery, you could see the areas where the ocean had went through Algeria, down through Mali and Nigeria. Whereas it does not show in the Trans-Saharan Seaway it going over west. I don't know why it doesn't show it west, but if you look at this image here on the left, it is so obvious that it's fluvial erosion. And I love to quote Randall Carlson, that although he disagrees on the Atlantis location, he does corroborate that this was indeed blasted by fluvial or fluvial events, one or more.
But he's saying rain, and you're saying ocean, right?
I think that this was bulldozed. When you look at the fact that what we're seeing here is carved bedrock with those striations, it seems to me, and hey, listen, I could be wrong on this. It's just that when I look at that, let me tell you what the mainstream scientists say about this. They say that this is all wind erosion.
Right.
So I took it upon myself, and I made a video on this probably a year or a year and a half ago, I took it upon myself to research the windiest places on Earth. And you'll find a number of articles that will list the 10 windiest places. Number 1 is Antarctica. Number 2 is in New Zealand. Number 3 is, I believe, Mount Washington in New Hampshire. I think number 4 is an area just outside Dodge City, Kansas, and so on and so on. And if you look at all of these locations from satellite imagery, not one single one of them has any resemblance at all to the striations you see over the Sahara. Right. And I love that Antarctica is number 1 because the fact that it's covered in ice and snow.
Yeah.
If wind naturally caused striations like we see here in this image, it seems reasonable to suggest that you would see something similar over Antarctica or any of these other locations, and you just don't. And now that we know that Trans-Saharan Seaway is a thing, but here's the issue. They say the Trans-Saharan Seaway was between 55 and 65, or 56 to 65 million years ago. So essentially the time of the dinosaurs. Now, that tells me there's a few things here. Either, and this is my theory.
And why do they think it was there in the first place? Is it because of evidence of like stuff from the ocean that we find there? And
there's fossils.
And so that could have just been caused by this gigantic wave that bulldozed this area that you're talking about, right? I mean,
I would say yes. The experts won't agree with me on that, but I don't think that it's far-fetched. Yeah. I think that there's something catastrophic that happened on Earth, whether the Earth expanded and contracted, which is of course pseudoscience. I'm not saying it's a fact. But something happened to cause a force of water over there, and the only explanation I could think of is that would have been from the ocean, and it would have had to have been sustained. I don't think it would have been just a tsunami created by some sort of asteroid impact. To me, it seems sustained. And so I think that we're looking at here is that there was something else, something separate from the Trans-Saharan Seaway that happened far more recently than the time of the dinosaurs. I don't think that the erosion that we see would still exist after that period of time. I could be wrong. But the reason why I bring this up is because when we consider the scientific evidence of the Green Sahara, that they say that it likely goes back and forth from green to a desert every 20,000 years, going back who knows how long of a period of time. It seems to me that would erase the evidence of itself over a course of 65 million years.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? I could be wrong. Like, I'm not saying people should believe me what I'm saying. I'm just telling people to think for themselves that science, guys, we're in the birth of science as far as I'm concerned. Imagine what we will know 100 years from now or 500 or 1,000 years from now, assuming that we keep going and the path that we're going. They're going to look back at us and laugh the way that we think that the people in the 1700s were primitive with their various technology. Yeah. So I'm simply saying here, I'll call it future science, that I think that in the future they will establish that there was some sort of flood event that happened here that we didn't think was possible today. Yeah. I'm not saying it's a fact. I want to be crystal clear on this because I get so much pushback. And I'm saying, like, look, I don't know. I'm a thinker. And I look at this, and I also look at the massive mainstream pushback on me on this. And sometimes it makes me think that when, like the saying goes, you get the most flack when you're over the target. And it just seems to me that because people say, well, why would they want to cover that up? Why would they want to, counter this? I'm like, well, there could be, when we look at the climate change narrative today, which is very sensitive, very controversial, it's very political. Yeah. This could upend that narrative. I think the Sahara Desert itself upends the narrative because it's like, okay, why did the Sahara turn from green to a desert?
You know what does that? Salt water. Salt water creates salinization, which turns things into deserts. I mean, so 100% ocean water would have caused northern Africa to look like this.
And here's another little detail is that a lot of the sand that makes up the Sahara Desert was known to blow. Well, they say it blew in from the ocean over a long period of time. They also say that it's like the stones and the mountains around the area that blew off, and over time, lots of time, man.
Nothing interesting ever happened. It's just time. Yeah.
We should consider the possibility that sand was moved in from the ocean during whatever this event was. This is just an idea. I know that everyone in the scientific community will disagree with what I just said, but it is a big dirt pit with hundreds and hundreds of feet of sand dunes in various places that's practically continental in size. Here you got that whalebone. That's in Egypt. Of course, this is like 30 million years old, so just forget about it. But
Still sitting on the top.
Yeah. I should mention
30 million years. So every 20,000 years, you're talking about like trees going in lush and filling up with soil, but that's still sitting on the top of the sand.
Right. Yeah. They say that, this is a funny thing. People can research how long it takes to become a fossil. It's almost like we were taught that it takes millions of years. I did a little bit more research on this, and it turns out that things can fossilize in hundreds and even just a couple thousand years. And don't quote me on this, but my understanding, and it's been a little while since I read about this, but my impression, the vibe I'm remembering, is being surprised at that it doesn't have to take millions of years for things to fossilize, especially based on the conditions. When you have an arid, dry environment that's hot like a desert, it can apparently accelerate the process. Okay. So everyone will disagree with me on this again, and I like to point that out, but like, what's to say that whalebone isn't tens of millions of years old like they thought? Maybe, just maybe, it's younger than they had thought. And honestly, when it comes to like carbon dating and other things, it's unfortunately highly unreliable. People need to come to grips that we don't know as much as we think we do.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's just stay open-minded.
We might have antibiotics. We can land rockets from space, and it's amazing. Yeah. But we're still at our infancy period as far as technology goes, that if we go on this path for hundreds and hundreds of more years, oh my God, imagine. Yeah. Just imagine. Yeah. Unimaginable, actually.
For sure. Let's look at, Ryan, can you pull the iPad back up? I want to look at just a couple of bit more pieces of evidence for the potential that this water, this salt water from the ocean, could have come into Africa and created this salinization and turned this land into desert.
The Emikusi volcano.
The Emikusi volcano. And you see all these striations. Like yes. If the water was going from that direction into here, it would have filled up the Mediterranean Sea. Northern Europe would have been under an ice sheet, and so it would have been spared from this, from the salt water coming in. So very lush and green still. But Africa, you can see all of these striations, here.
Yep.
Coming down from the Mediterranean Sea and then kind of being pushed out this way and out to the left. It's all just goes over the Richtat Structure and back out to the ocean. Yes. But when you look at Emikusi, it's just a great example of where did Emikusi? Oh, it's down here.
Right there.
Yeah. If you look at that and you look at again, you've got salt.
That is salt
at the top. And so if this was filled up with water, ocean water, and the ocean water settled here, of what you're going to be left with at the bottom of it is salt,
right?
The salt water from the oceans.
Let me just be the devil's advocate for the naysayers that have come, because I want to share their thoughts too, so people can research this fairly. Okay. They say that's natron, which is sodium, but there's only two places on Earth that it's found inside of a caldera, which is here, and I believe in Somalia, or is it Tanzania? There's another volcano, and natron, I'm like, it's a chemical process and involves salt. And since this is found in a highly acidic place, such as a volcanic dome, it seems to me that could be related to that process. But here's what's significant. Because I'm not 100% certain the ocean had blown over that. I think that it did, but I can't prove it. And I have to look at what the naysayers will say, because I got to entertain that I'm not right about everything. But hey, pause right there.
It looks like it went right over that area, right?
Right. So here's what's so important about this.
And there's salt here.
Right. So if you look, all these striations, I have a few things to say on this, so here we go.
Please.
So first and foremost, they will say that this is created by the wind. Which I disagree on, and it goes back to my point from a few minutes ago, which is that if you look at the windiest places on Earth, it doesn't look anything like this.
Right.
Let me correct myself on something that I had said in one of my videos on this, which is that if you were to scroll out and look down to the lower left of this area, go a little to the left, pan out a little bit, right there. See all that white?
Yep.
I had said that was salt. That's not salt. I always mispronounce the word, and this is what happens when you read instead of hearing it, but I called them diatoms. I don't know how to say it. It's diatoms. Those are actually fossilized bacteria that was once at the bottom of Mega Lake Chad. That is not salt right there. I had incorrectly said that it was in one of my videos. Okay. At that time, that's what I thought it was, and that's, but now I know. But that's not what matters here. What matters is that if you go back to Emikusi, in that same area that we're right there, all that erosion. So pause right there. Mm-hmm. So you see all the dark areas, that's all volcanic stone. It's basalt. And what's interesting is that the southern portion of it that we're looking at right now, the last time that was known to have erupted and flowed with lava was between 12,000 and 15,000 years ago. And this is the reason why this is so consequential, is that when you look at that, which clearly looks like water erosion, and I should also mention that if you were to bring up, and you don't have to, but one of the other images of the alleged Trans-Saharan Seaway shows it going over the same region, that it didn't just go straight down through the middle of Africa to the east of the Richtat, it also went around Emikusi. And I'm like, guys, this is evidence of water erosion. So if you look at how it strips the volcanic stone, it's like it just sheared it off, like especially right there. Just pause right there. It's almost a straight line. It looks, I don't think that that's wind, brother. I think that's water erosion. And, you know, again, when it comes to these striations that look fluvial in nature, find me one other location. I've challenged people online before, and I have never gotten, a response on this. Find me one other location on Earth that looks like this that was caused by wind erosion.
There's not.
I haven't seen it, and I've given my naysayers every opportunity because I've challenged them right back, like on Twitter, on X. Say, okay, find me just one location on Earth of wind erosion that looks like this. It's been crickets, brother. I haven't got it. And so people need to understand is that the concept of a continental-sized tsunami or flooding or whatever is just, they don't believe that it's possible, so therefore I'm wrong. What I'm here to say is that this is future science, that what we think was impossible is something that likely happened in the past. Now, what would have caused this? This is where it goes down the whole rabbit hole of, you know, whether it's a pole shift, continental crust displacement, all things that are considered pseudoscience, not pole shifts themselves, but the catastrophic nature that would follow them. And that's the only explanation I can think of, is that when we look at the Adam and Eve story, which you were talking about with Ryan on a interview podcast from a number of months ago, there's the Adam and Eve story written by Dr. Chan Thomas, discussed in a CIA meeting in the late 50s, or was it maybe it was written in the late 50s and discussed in 1963 or 67, something in the
early
60s.
60s, yeah, sounds about right.
And I have, despite the fact that they declassified that they discussed this in a meeting, and just to say, like I told you at dinner last night, I was incorrect when I had previously shared that the Adam and Eve story was, the book itself was classified. It wasn't. It was just the meeting itself, which anything the CIA discusses is classified. However, what was not released in the declassified files is why they were talking about this Adam and Eve story in the first place and what their conclusions were. And what's fascinating about this book is that it describes the nature of pole shifts being the reoccurring event that happens throughout Earth's history that has caused a repeated cycling of the collapse of human civilizations. That in this book, it describes that this event happens, a partial pole shift, every 6,500 years. And what's interesting about this is that he mentions a date of 11,500 years ago. Or actually, no. Was it 11,550? Yeah, it's 11,550 years ago, and this was written over 50 years ago, which coincides exactly with the 11,600-year time frame of the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe. And this was decades before the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe was science. I don't know how this gentleman came up with this, but what he describes is that when the poles shift, and again, this is considered pseudoscience, but that when it happens, it causes continental displacement, which causes continental-sized tsunamis that flow 2 miles high. He says 2 miles over the Earth. And what's interesting about the Emikusi volcano is that it's just over 2 miles high, and there's salt in that dome. And brother, we don't find salt in domes except for two places on Earth: Emikusi and not far away in Tanzania.
Right. And it would take 10,000 feet of water to create those ripples by the Richtat structure that look that are bigger than the ones up in Montana.
Yep.
You know, from 1,000 feet of water.
Those ripples are in Africa 3 to 4 times larger.
Right.
So if that was created by a force of water, we're talking about something miles high, which is supposed to not exist, not supposed to be possible.
Right.
And it seems to me that something happened. I think because a lot of people say, well, why isn't there more evidence of lost civilization? And I've already discussed that, well, the evidence is there. It's Göbekli Tepe, it's the Vases, it's the pyramids, it's whatever.
Yeah.
But if that's not enough for people, I would say that, hey, maybe we should entertain the possibility that the nature of cataclysms is so much more extreme than people even want to believe. that if pole shifts cause that type of cataclysm, I'm sorry to tell y'all that, like, yeah, it's going to wipe out everything for good. You know, or at least most things. Yeah, if you're on some mountain peak, things could survive. And I look at places like Machu Picchu, which are such an enigma.
Amazon's going to be fun because it's got a 14,000 foot tall barrier in front of it, which is why people have been there for 30,000 years under, from this logic. Yeah.
So to me, this is one of the most fascinating topics. And I honestly think that I think I'm on the target on this one. I think something happened. I can't prove it. Someone else is going to have to prove it. I'm just sharing ideas here.
Yeah.
And I'm sharing what I find to be an interesting topic, and I'm putting it on blast in a way that fulfills me, because I find it's just very fulfilling to get people chatting about something that's so interesting.
Yep.
And if nothing else, going back to the Atlantis-Richtat theory, even if Atlantis never existed, the Richtat structure being such an enigma, listen, some people think it's a collapsed volcanic dome. There are no other examples anywhere on Earth that have the concentric circles like that. You could see I've seen collapsed volcano images, and yeah, I can see a very loose resemblance of that. There's a lower layer and a layer above it, but it's not even remotely circular. It's a blob. It looks like a blob. And so, if nothing else, going back to the Richtat, I'm like, hey guys, if you read the science papers on it, they'll tell you just how inconclusive it is. They describe it as a mystery. And when I've had so much pushback from people involving the Atlantis-Richtat theory, like, this is understood science. And I'm like, that doesn't mean that people didn't build a civilization on it that wasn't taken out by a flood. People say, where's the artifacts? Where's the artifacts? I'm like, well, the theory is dependent on that it was bulldozed by a force of water, and hence it would be out in the Atlantic Ocean. And they'll say, well, how convenient. You're suggesting this is the site, but there's no evidence for it. I'm like, hang on a second. It has concentric circles, three that would be of water, 2 of land, opening at the south, red, black, white color stones, gold, mountains to the north that share the same exact name. Also, the first king of, I forgot to mention this earlier, not just the mountains named Atlas, but the first king of Mauritania was Atlas. Mm-hmm. Now, that dates back like 2,000 years ago, something like that, if I'm remembering right. So I'm not saying it's the same exact king, but the fact that name is the same name and was shared, I think was something that was passed down. What an interesting coincidence at the one site that matches more than a dozen striking similarities to what Plato had described. At what level does it go beyond a coincidence? So I think that it's by far the most likely location. I think it's worthy of further study. And until I'm convinced that it's not, I'm going to keep discussing it.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Yeah, super cool. Yeah, and some people might be saying if this event were to happen and all of this ocean water were to, somehow move on to North Africa, we would see this in other places. And this was the video that I made with Ryan that you checked out, and I think we do. You see the same sort of thing in Saudi Arabia, which the water would have gone, into the Mediterranean. This is one of the saltiest lakes in the world, of course. It's sitting here inside of like a mountain. You can't really see, but the water, it's I think 30% salt. If you go onto the west coast of the United States,
I was just thinking that.
Salt water again creates desertification. Salinization turns things to desert. And look at the western half of the United States is much more deserty, and you've got, of course, salt. This was
the Great Salt Lake. It was an inland sea.
Salt Lake, right?
They say, it's millions of years ago.
Yeah,
right. So it's not.
Right. And you've got evidence, of potentially. Of the same thing happening here. You've got like this kind of like the smearing of this. What I would, if these were mountains, this land would have been smeared out to the right here. If the water really was pushing from the left to the right, similar type of a thing happening here. You've got the west. This is the Andes, of course, so very, very tall. It would not have gotten over that. But then you've got salt in here, and you see like all these kind of crease marks here of like, potentially that's water pushing up, for that extended period of time, like you're talking about, into that area.
Or
smearing here, look
at that.
Of this.
That right there.
That right there. If the water is going around, people have to realize like it's not going to go straight west to east. It's going to go around in a circle, like around Antarctica, like that. And if it's going around Antarctica, and it's pushing through that area. You know, of course, it's going to create something like that. It's going to push the land, you know, all the dirt, the land from the left to the right. So,
Right.
so I think it should be explored. And these are things that without Google Earth and without, you know, these theories that we've developed over the last couple of 100 years have been without satellite imagery for us. And we're kind of like attempting to explain the world's geography by point by point, place by place, as opposed to looking at a more global, a more, you know, catastrophic potentially history that we might actually have.
Right. When you were showing in Peru earlier, it makes me think of Lake Titicaca and, you know, all that area. And I remember Randall Carlson mentioning how there's some discrepancies involving the data of the potential dating of the Peruvian Andes, and that the tops of the various mountains there, the lack of erosion, he believes, suggests that it is younger than what we were described, and that perhaps, you know, the Peruvian Andes were created in a far more rapid and more recent process than what we believed. And when you were showing, I don't know exactly where it was, but where it was showing the potential water, it almost, I don't know where you were, but basically it makes me wonder if this could be related to continental crust displacement, that there was the continents moved at a rapid pace during an event, and it pushed those mountains up in, you know, a rapid pace, and something that we never would have thought was possible.
Like here, you mean?
Right there. That's what I was talking about. If that wasn't water, you know, ripples or whatever, it almost looks like it was scrunched.
Exactly.
You know, like pushed.
Right.
And that's, I'm sure that's what they'd say. I bet you that is the explanation. They'll just say that it happened over vast eons of time, you know, many millions of years.
Right.
But when you look at it, it's like, I don't know. It almost kind of looks, I could entertain the possibility it was far more recent. That's what I think. I think if you want to know what I really think, is that the Earth is far more volatile than what we thought. I think that the continents do move. I don't think that Pangea happened over as many billions or hundreds of millions of years, I guess I should say, that they describe. I entertain the possibility of continental crust displacement. The biggest argument against it has been Antarctica. I've heard Graham Hancock talk about this, where he was asked or something related to his thoughts on continental crust displacement, and apparently Antarctica lacks evidence of that. But maybe there's something we don't know. Maybe Antarctica, for whatever reason, its position on Earth, maybe it wasn't prone to being moved. Like, I don't know. But it seems to me that something else has happened. I think the Sahara Desert is evidence of that. You know?
Yep. Well, yeah, this has been a great start to the show. Super interesting. I really enjoyed it. I want to ask, maybe as we segue into the final whatever hour or so that we have left.
Sure.
There's evidence of ancient global civilization, or at least things that tie different people from different parts of the world together. And some of that evidence are things like that have been talked about many times, are things like the stone nubs, things like the handbags that we find all over the world, the pyramids that we find all over the world. Is there anything else that jumps out that kind of connects people globally?
A few things. Some are controversial. One is polygonal stones that you see on 4 or arguably 5 continents around the world, and we'll talk about that. The other one, so this is, are you open to something very controversial?
Absolutely, yeah.
So this is
limitless. We're limitless.
Right on. So this is a sensitive topic, and it's hard. I've spoken about this before, and people have come after me for it. So it's the swastika. Okay. And so I was astonished to learn that the swastika, which was stolen and bastardized by terribly evil people in the 20th century, I was surprised to learn that it's actually a prehistoric symbol that dates back approximately 10,000 years and has been found on 5 continents around the world. Let me just say ahead of this, I can swear any word I want.
Whatever you want.
Fuck the Nazis. Yep. Fuck Hitler. The evil, terrible, despicable people that ruined was a symbol that represented peace in Hinduism and elsewhere. And for whatever reasons they chose that symbol and ruined it for everybody is so unfortunate. But for this conversation, let's put the stupid Aryan stuff aside. Let's put all the Nazi stuff aside and just focus on the ancient part of it.
Yep.
Which is that when I saw that symbol has been found in North America dating back over 2,200 years ago, specifically the Hopewell Mound people of what is in modern-day Ohio, as well as the Navajo and the Yavapai, I think the Pima Indians as well in the American Southwest. It's also found on ancient pottery in Peru, of course throughout Europe in many countries, as well as Africa and a few different places. And of course, Asia, which, it is known that the swastika is found in Asia. In fact, I was in Japan earlier this year, and you'll still see that symbol at different shrines and stuff. And they actually have labels now to make it clear this is not, because, tourists visit and like, what's this?
Right.
Unrelated to the evildoers of the 20th century. Again, just want to reiterate that. But that symbol is so highly specific. Some people have suggested that it could be the Milky Way galaxy. Some people have suggested it's the Big Dipper. But that's not exactly what I'm seeing. I'm not convinced of that, and maybe nobody knows, especially, I'm talking about the origins of it, dating back approximately 10,000 years. I mean, you'll find it on rock art in Iran, like 7,000 to 9,000 years ago, somewhere around that, in other places. And the fact that it's in North America, the fact that this symbol is so specific looking, I don't think that it's just something that someone doodling just comes up with. To me, it's indicative, or let's just say strong suggestive evidence that ancient humans were traversing the continents and the oceans thousands of years before we were taught in school. For example, we were all taught that it wasn't until Christopher Columbus, or in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, as they put it. But then you have the swastika. Then you have this nub phenomena, as it's called, where like there's these what's the word for it? It's like a protrusion, or that might not be the right word, but it's a nub. Mm-hmm. Some people call it lifting bosses, and you'll find them in Egypt, you'll find them in Peru, you'll find them in different parts of Asia, in Europe, and some people, now the purpose of it is debatable. Some people said it's just, they're lifting bosses for lifting the stone, but what I witnessed, specifically in Peru, is that a vast majority of the stoneworks on the walls, they don't have these nubs, and so many of them are the way that they're centered, or lack thereof. They're so off balance that if you were to try to, because the explanation would be that you used ropes to sling around the nubs and move and lift the stone, but so many of them are so off-centered that it looks like the thing would just topple over. And many people have examined this and look at this, and it just seems that it had some sort of other purpose. Now, whatever the purpose was isn't as important as the fact that they exist in so many places across the world. What I think is even better evidence, and this is debated, but the polygonal stones. You have these stones, whether it's from Egypt and Peru, that are fixed together as if they were laser cut. I'm not saying they were laser cut. I'm saying that these stones are so precise, granite stones. And you would think that it looks like they were cut with lasers. Again, not saying that. I'm just making a point that say the way they're affixed, the stones are stacked on each other. It's so specific and it's so precise. And the fact that they're on at least 4 continents around the world is also something that's surprising. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's pyramids on 4 continents around the world either. Now, the devil's advocate, the naysayers, will say that pyramids are the most basic and simple structure of all time. Like you have a layer, and you do another layer on top that's a little smaller, and keep doing it, and children will figure this out with their own little kids' blocks.
Right.
The issue with that is that that's not when it comes to multi-ton stones, and stones that are tens of tons. Then it becomes something a little different. I don't think that it is a natural inclination of human ingenuity to create a pyramid. Of course, there's people that disagree and will say the opposite of what I just did, and these are just thoughts and opinions. But I think that when you add all these similarities together involving ancient stonework and pyramids and various symbols that may be controversial, it seems to me that transoceanic sea travel was happening thousands of years before we were taught in school. And I actually think that it's unreasonable to say that it couldn't have happened. Humans we explore by our very nature. There's something about us that wants to see the unknown. We want to travel the cosmos. Earth is pretty great. I have no desire to leave here. But, there's something in us that wants to explore. And so it is entirely possible that people had created boats and sailed the ocean thousands and thousands of years ago, and the evidence has since gone. I've heard different people talk in different podcasts, the lack of shipwrecks and stuff from ancient times in the Ice Age, and that debunks a lost ancient sea-traveling civilization. I'm like,
what's there going to be left from 12,000 years ago or 15,000 years ago? We're talking about wood boats. Like, are we supposed to be finding like the planks floating in the ocean or something? Like, what is that argument even about?
It's actually a nonsensical argument, and I would use the Titanic as proof.
Yeah.
So what? That sank in 1912? So 112 or 14 years ago? And it's more than 50% gone. And I think there's estimates that it's going to be entirely gone in 150 years. Don't quote me on that. I remember reading about it a few years ago when I used this point before, but it's going away quickly. And that was 50,000 tons of iron and steel, and it's going to be non-existent. I remember hearing Joe Rogan talk about this topic a number of years ago, where he was giving the analogy of, like, if you look at old World War II vehicles, or from that time frame in like a junkyard, and they're rusted straight through where you could see through the doors, and all you have, the seat cushions are just gone like they never existed. You just have the springs and the rims of the vehicles. And, in a few hundred more years, those will be nothing but dust, including the engine blocks, like it never existed in the first place. And so when we're talking about a time frame of thousands of years,
right?
Not just a few hundred years, not even just a few thousand years, but let's say 10,000 plus years. Like if we were circling back to the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe time frame of 11,600 years ago. I mean, think about that. I just said 10,000 years. Well, 10,000, the difference between 10,000 and 11,600 is 1,600 years. That in itself is enough time for everything to go away.
Like paintings and like art and paper, it survives like 1,000 years maximum. If it's preserved in like a photograph that you take, it's perfect. You know what lasts? Stones. Stones last. Rocks last.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, where's the evidence? I've said this before. It's the stonework.
Yeah.
It's the stonework.
That's all we would have.
Yeah. So,
like, where's the trash is an argument that I've heard. Like, where's the trash? Like, where are these people's plastic bags? Like, is that really what would prove that there was a civilization? I've never understood that. Where's the trash?
You know what's interesting about that one too? I'm with you.
Where's the 12,000-year-old trash?
They always bring up the plastic too. Like, well, if they were so advanced, where's the plastics? The plastics will last tens of thousands of years. And I'm like, I have a few points to say on that. And I'm actually going off Graham Hancock, because he had said maybe they would have thought of something smarter or chosen not to use oil-based products.
Right.
Or maybe they were smart enough to use the hemp plant, which naturally grows on, I don't want almost all the continents. I don't know which, not Antarctica, obviously, but I don't know if it grows in Australia either, but definitely on multiple continents around the world, the hemp plant, you can create plastic from hemp, which is completely biodegradable and just as strong as any other plastic, which is pretty wild considering it's a weed, and entirely biodegradable. So just because they didn't use plastics, but let's just say, I also like when people say that plastics will last thousands and thousands of years, and I'm like, under what conditions?
Yeah, we just don't know that at all. We have no idea how long plastic lasts.
I know I looked this up years ago. When was plastic invented? It's not even 100. I don't want to quote myself, but it's not that old.
No,
is it even 100 years old?
It might be 100 years old since invention, but yeah.
1907.
Yeah, but it wasn't really used until like the 60s or something like that. Yeah.
And
that's
when
my understanding.
That's fascinating. So because 60s, of that, it's not possible for us to say how long it's truly going to last. Now, I'm not saying we can't analyze things in a laboratory and come up with some estimates, but here's a little anecdotal case in point. Childhood home, my parents' place in Arizona, and we end up finding years later with my dad doing some yard work, this little plastic truck I had. It was buried. I guess I buried it or whatever happened. And when we dug it up, the earth had busted it up. Because if you think about it, between the seasons, soil will expand and retract because of the heat and cold. You'll have a freezes, and then it warms, and then there's moisture, and then it dries, and it's constantly at a state of change, which is going to erode it. And there was pieces of plastic missing from that truck that were just gone, that weren't in the little hole. We dug it out. It wasn't deep at all, by the way. This was shallow, a little shallow grave for this plastic truck. And I remember thinking to myself, did this plastic erode? Like, because once you break something down, like let me actually use an example of stainless steel. Stainless steel actually does rust. You get one little chip in it. Like anyone that's bought silverware and chipped it up, like you'll see, like, it's, if you just take good care of it, it'll last. But if I was to go get some sort of stainless steel tooling and threw it outside and buried it and came back, I don't know how long later, a few years, whatever it is, as the soil retracts in the heat and the cold and the moisture, it's going to blemish it and it's going to eat away. And over a period of however long, maybe it's 100 years, a few hundred years, whatever it is, it's going to one day be dust. And so when we're talking about timeframes that exceed 10,000 years, we have to accept the fact that it is possible that there was tremendous amounts of artifacts that once existed that are now been lost to what I call, what others have called, the sands of time. Mm-hmm. It takes it all away. Yep. Look at, so we were at dinner last night. We mentioned, because I'm from Arizona, and you and Crystal mentioned you've been to Sedona. Mm-hmm. All those red rocks was created from metal deposits. It's iron oxide. It's rust. That's what stained the stone. So at one point, however many millions of years, they say hundreds of millions of years ago, there was massive iron deposits there that since rusted away and went away and stained the stone. Beautiful picture, by the way. I recommend everyone travels to Sedona at least once. It's breathtaking. It's just like no other site on earth. It's spectacular. Yep. So what you're seeing here, what was once there was vast deposits of metal. It's gone. Now, they'll say that's 300 million years old or something like that. And it was once under the ocean, which is fascinating because that's 4,000 feet above sea level now. But the reality is this, that when I look at, and not to bring up the ugly swastika again, when I look at that, when I look at the polygonal stonework, when I look at the nubs, when I look at the pyramids, you could say that not one of those details by itself is definitive proof of a seafaring civilization. But when you keep adding all the details together, it seems to me that it becomes something you shouldn't ignore. And actually, let me give you a case in point while I'm on it that I just thought of. There's a study that I had read. This is a scientific study saying, because, okay, when it comes to Antarctica, its known discovery of modern times was 1820. Yet there's maps of it from a couple hundred years older than that. Yep. Some of them are debatable, but
Perry Reese map.
Yep, right? The Perry Reese. But there's another one by I'm drawing a blank on it in this moment, but it's separate from the Perry Reese map. But it seems to annotate Antarctica, so going back to the study I was just mentioning, is that there was apparently the Polynesians, through verbal legend, the study concluded that there was so much of it that suggests that they had discovered Antarctica 1,500 years or 1,200 years, one of those two numbers, because they're similar when you see them written down, before its discovery in 1820. This could be Googled. You don't have to bring it up, Ryan. Anyone can check it out if they want. And it's not definitive proof. It's just a study that suggests that Antarctica was discovered by lost Polynesians drifting into the southern Pacific or the Indian Ocean, wherever the heck they found their way up to get to Antarctica. And so, it's accepted that, something, people had found it. Now, maybe it was by accident. They're on rafts and they got lost. Who knows? But the point is this. When it comes to boats, if we could accomplish relatively sophisticated sailboats in the 16th century, 15th century, enough to travel vast oceans, I think it's unreasonable to suggest that couldn't have been done thousands of years earlier, and we just don't know about it.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to think like that South America was so densely populated with Maya and Aztecs, all that so many ancient people in South America. It's like, but the explanation for how all the people got into the Amazon and got into Central America and South America is the land bridge, right? From that connected North America to essentially like Asia, Russia, Asia. That's interesting. I don't know if I buy that's the way that humans got into the South Americas, I guess, like what people are, is it like 12,000 years ago that they're saying now that but now we've got footprints in North America from 22,000 years ago, right? So what's your take on like when did humans come to the Americas and how did they start populating it?
The fair, honest answer is that I just don't know. But what I know is that there's some really bizarre studies where there's DNA evidence of aboriginal DNA in some mummies found in South America. I hope I'm not misquoting this. I shared this in a video. Well, it's one of my earlier videos, so this is like 7+ years ago, and I haven't really looked back on it too much since, so forgive me if I'm misquoting myself, but I know that there is evidence that suggests that there was a migration pattern that got to South America that conflicts with the land bridge of North America that would have said they went over from Russia and then found their way. Because it's like, how did Aboriginal... Ryan, will you Google this? Will you type in Aboriginal or Aborigine DNA North America or South America? Just type in Aboriginal DNA America and see what shows up. I know there's something there. Okay. While you're bringing it up, let me just finish my point with they're called the cocaine mummies of Egypt.
Yeah.
So some have suggested that proves a cross-continental, cross-oceanic connection between Egypt and Peru, which, again, we have the polygonal stonework as well as the nubs. That's a similarity. But my knowledge of the Sahara once being green has opened my mind a bit. So we know that Africa and South America were once connected. Mm-hmm. Whether it's 100+ million years ago or whatever, okay. But now that and we know this just through the stones that match in the horn. Or all right, well, we'll talk about this in 1 second. Let me finish my point. Forgive me. So now that we know that the Sahara was green and that the Africa and South America were connected, what's to say that the species, the cocoa plant, right? Isn't that where the cocaine comes from? Cocoa? Is it the cocoa plant?
Yep.
Maybe that existed in the Sahara as well, and that's the simplest explanation. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just trying to be devil's advocate because other people have said the cocaine mummies, it's not conclusive, it's this and that, but they did find cocaine in an Egyptian mummy.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe that's a possibility. So what is this article?
Is the explanation now that the archaeologist that was digging them up was snorting coke and like accidentally dropped some on him? Like that's what I heard was like now the traditional, like the accepted explanation for this.
We shouldn't... I haven't heard that. I mean, I don't know if it's a joke, but like that's actually totally possible.
Yeah,
There's a lot of people that do drugs. Yeah. And look, come on. I know people that work in the banking industry that have told high levels that have said there's a lot of people that do blow. It's you're making stuff happen.
Right.
That's not just a joke in a movie. That's real. Yeah. People do drugs. And so that's possible. Like no archaeologists do drugs.
Right.
Was there anything, what did this article say about the Aboriginal DNA? I don't want to be wrong about this. First, Americans had indigenous Australian genes. There you go. Indigenous South Americans share DNA from indigenous people in Oceania. So southern, maybe not necessarily Australia, but in the area, the islands around it, right? So I can't say that 100% debunks the Bering Sea Bridge. I shouldn't say that, I guess. But it is bizarre because why aren't they finding... Oh, here's my point. This is what I said in the video several years ago. I remember the point now. Why didn't they find... If they went over the land bridge across North America into South America, why aren't they finding that same DNA in North America?
In North America, exactly. Can I show you why I think it is?
Please.
Ryan, can you pull up Google Earth? Here's just something that I noticed, and I shared on an episode last week that I think is worth exploring, and I think it's interesting, and I think it kind of speaks to the global civilization theory with all the evidence that we see there. If you look at Easter Island, which is right here, right out in the middle of nowhere, right, and you zoom out and you see all these islands. All these are underwater.
Okay, this is what you're talking about.
You're going to see where I'm going with this really quickly, but you see all of these that if sea levels were 400 feet lower. And in addition to that, if you had a lot of ice on the caps on the North Pole and on the South Pole, that was even more pushing the weight of the sea level at the equator up, then these could have all been above water. And then what's this? I'm wondering like, what is like this just clearly connects straight to Peru, straight to South America, straight to the Amazon. And it's just like this hockey stick, and it goes out here and it goes out here and it goes all the way to Easter Island out here in the middle of nowhere. And then you've got all these islands that continue to kind of go and connect over here to what would be, ultimately that Australia, the continent of Mu or whatever, and into Asia. And if this was an ice age, and we're talking about very close to the equator here, where it would have been warm and people would have been traveling, I just feel like it's so much more likely that people would have been traveling those islands in this area on little boats or whatever they had, as opposed to all the way up at the frickin' North Pole through ice and through tundra. Like, why couldn't this be the way that people got to South America and populated South America, and why South America is so much more densely populated than North America?
Brother, that is such an excellent point. Yeah. Like, why would they be going through that frozen land to get there? Which is so, brother, you die going through that. It's not to say it's impossible, but like, you wouldn't want to, and you probably wouldn't make it anyway. And again, the fact they're not finding the Aboriginal DNA in North America, but they found it in South America. And now with you showing this, that is fascinating.
It goes straight to here.
Do we have the depth on it? I know if you use Google Earth with the mouse, it'll show you the elevation if you have it checked, but it's okay if you don't. But I'm curious.
I don't. But
it doesn't even matter what its depth is now, because things change.
Right.
Sea levels change, but I am also, and this is of course more pseudoscience for you.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that the Earth hasn't expanded and contracted, and there's a few reasons why. But going back to that Adam and Eve story, that's essentially what it describes. Is that, and again, this is just what it says in the book, that it describes that there's essentially a mini sun in the center of the Earth. And over time, it eventually goes through a cycle where it'll do a brief expansion and collapse on itself, like a miniature micronova of some kind, supernova or micro one, whatever you want to call it. And it causes catastrophic things to happen on the surface, such as supervolcanoes and earthquakes, and perhaps continental crust displacement, and perhaps an expanding or shrinking Earth. Again, I always want to say it, like, this is not something that mainstream science entertains. However, it would make sense if the Earth had contracted and whatnot, then, like, for example, at one point in time, the Earth was said to be completely covered in ocean, and now most of the Earth's water is actually frozen inside the mantle. Did you know that?
Mm-mm.
Oh, Ryan, let's blow Matt's mind real quick. Google Earth ocean mantle, and it will come up. So there's more water on Earth, inside the Earth, than there is in all the oceans combined.
I knew that. I didn't know it was frozen.
Some of it is. It's frozen inside rocks, I believe.
Okay.
Inside the minerals of the non-liquid part of the mantle, if I remember correctly. So here we go.
That's crazy.
400 miles under our feet. Several oceans worth. Yeah, Earth has a vast interior ocean 400 miles under our feet that creates ring woodite gems.
I see this stuff, and it's like, I bet that's probably true, but like, how much do we really know? You know, I mean, like, how much? It's there's so much information out there. It's like, how much do we? I question everything these days.
We have to.
Yeah.
Well, okay. When you said, "What do we know?" Well, here's what I could tell you. We do know is that the deepest we've ever drilled into the crust. Do you know the depth?
2 miles or something.
It's less than 7, and the crust is at its thickest, I believe, 30 miles, or just shy of it.
Okay.
So we haven't even gone through the crust.
Yeah.
We've gone 6-something miles into the crust. And this is talking about 400 miles beneath us. Mm-hmm. We don't know jack shit.
Yeah, we don't know anything.
We just don't. We don't even know what's inside the Earth. Now, hold on. Obviously, we can infer a few things based on scientific measurement, such as an iron core, molten of some kind, just because of our compasses and other things. We also have seismic data that shows that clearly something's moving inside the Earth. So it's and we can all see volcanoes spewing magma that turns into lava. So it's very reasonable to suggest that there is a molten core inside the Earth, and that molten core creates our magnetic field, our sphere, the Earth's shield, so to speak. And that's what creates it, as it's believed. And So, all these things come together that, okay, that it makes sense. We know some things that's going inside the earth. I'm not saying we don't know anything. But at the same time, there's so many unknowns, and, who knows what else is going inside the earth.
Right.
It's a fun topic.
It is.
I will say this, going back to the point about more ocean or more water existing inside the earth than above it. If, let's just say, the expanding earth theory was something real, and then we talk about the Great Flood. And here I was earlier saying, I'm not saying it covered every mountain chain, the Peruvian Andes and Mount Everest. But what if? So going back to Genesis, everyone focuses on, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Do you know what the verse right before that one says? It says the springs of the earth opened up. And now we know through scientific study in just the last few years, recently, that there's more water inside the earth than above it. So when it talks about the springs opening up.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
And then I look at whatever happened to the Sahara, not just the Sahara, as you look at it as it goes east-northeast from the Sahara up until Asia. And it looks like that whole area was blasted by a force of water. So here's something good with the Richtat structure. I'm not saying I believe in this. This is just fun. It kind of looks like, just a little bit, like a whirlpool. Like what if, this is just fun talk, brother. What if the Richtat structure was either the opening, or I'm not saying it's where water emitted from, but maybe it went down in there. And it's just such I know how silly it sounds. I'm not saying I believe this at all. I'm just saying, like, it looks like something happened with water over that whole area. And it's so extreme that either it's a 2-mile high force of water, which sounds ridiculous to some people. But when I hear about the springs of the earth opening up, what is specific? Look, if they want to say the whole thing is made up and it's all, a metaphor, it's just, a legend, it's just fairy tales. Well, it's one thing, then why wouldn't you just say it just rained forever and flooded us out? It just kept raining and the rain gods killed us off. Okay. I could understand how someone could make that up and tell that to children before bed or something. They say the springs opened up.
Yeah.
And now we know that there's more water inside the earth than all the earth oceans combined. And so the question is, what would cause, if there was, let's say with the pole shift, the poles, it is a scientific fact that the poles do shift.
Right. Yeah.
What they believe in the science of it, let's say, not the pseudo Adam and Eve story part of it, is that there's a shift in the Earth's molten core. It causes the Earth shields to decline. Our compasses change. And they're actively changing now, by the way. It is a scientific fact. The Earth's poles are actively shifting. They've been shifting for several decades, and it's accelerating. It went from like 20 miles a year from the North Pole back in the late 80s to like almost 40 years now per year shifting. They've had to update runway numbers throughout the world because of it. I don't know if you've heard of this.
I'm familiar, yeah.
A lot of people don't realize, and I'll just tell anyone that's not familiar, that when you land on a runway and you see the numbers, if it says 1-2, that means you're facing 120 degrees. Runway 9 is 90 degrees. They've had to shift these, and we've been doing it for the last 15 years or something like that. So here we got an image here. Yep. And that's even outdated, because think about how far we are from 2017, or this is something that is happening. If nothing else, it could cause changes, because let's just be clear. They say that when the poles shift, it will not be catastrophic. It's not going to cause continental crust displacement. It's not going to cause any of that. What they say is that the worst case scenario is that there's two things they say.
When they flip, or when an excursion, or a flip, or a shift? What do you?
A flip.
A flip.
A flip.
Yeah.
An excursion is a partial, flip. And so what they say is that it could cause telecommunication systems issues and stuff with the grid, which, timeout, if that happens, that is apocalyptic. If our power grid goes down, if our satellites go down, if our internet goes down, if any one of those things happen, never mind all at once, civilization as we know it, society would collapse. The supply chain would end. You wouldn't be able to fuel your vehicles. The city water pumps would stop. It's game over. Say goodnight. Even if they just unplugged the internet for a short period of time, you can't even ring up, like when you look at, cash registers. They're all connected to the internet now. They don't, like you need the internet for credit cards or anything else. And but something else that could happen with the pole shift is a change in the ocean currents. And if that's the case, that will be apocalyptic, because there are two things that affect weather on Earth more than anything. Number one is the sun, which isn't hard to wrap our heads around. It's the sun.
Right.
It's warm. Number two is the ocean currents. And this is the reason why the UK doesn't, despite being so far north, it's fairly temperate. They don't get a ton of snow. And it's because of the Gulf Stream coming up from the Caribbean, and it warms, and that affects the weather out there. So if there was a shift in the ocean currents, and I believe I saw some articles not long ago, just in a matter of months, that there was, Ryan, will you Google this to type in something to the effect of Earth's ocean currents changing and see if there's something that comes out? Have you heard of this?
I have, yeah. That's very, very legitimate and a very strong possibility just in the next couple of decades, apparently, according to some research. Yeah.
So here we go. Ocean current system could shut down as early as 2025, leading to a climate disaster. This is a 2023 article.
This is space.com.
Space.com.
Yeah. I mean,
this is not, so I want to tell people,
this isn't pseudoscience. This is space.com.
This, I don't know if they're going to say it in here, but I'm telling you, this is related to the Earth's declining magnetic field. It is because the pole shift is underway. What they will say is that it could be another 1,000 years before it's complete. However, there's so little we don't know about pole shifts because we've never experienced one in modern times. We have data that they've happened several hundred times in our known history that we can analyze through scientific measurement. So it's something that does happen. The issue here is that through that same data, and there is a mountain chain in eastern Oregon, can't remember the name of the mountain, but there was from one of the Earth's prior pole shifts, a full flip. What happens is that when volcanic rock cools, wherever the magnetic north was at that time when it cooled, it becomes a time capsule that if you take your compass over to that stone, and this works for pottery as well, the compass will move to that prior magnetic north location, which is super cool. Mm-hmm. Super, like a fun little experiment. It's like, wow, you can move your compass over a stone and watch it flip. It's wild. Mm-hmm. But what was interesting is in that particular mountain chain, they saw evidence that showed that when the poles flip, it starts slow and then it accelerates. And in this documentary I saw on Nova, by the way, this is an older one. It might be 15 years old now. They say that when the poles finally do flip, it goes slow, and it speeds up, and it gets to such a point where you could see the compass moving throughout the day. Mm-hmm. So it's like they described it as being like is it like a dreidel or a tabletop that you spin? What do you call them?
You spin a dreidel, yeah.
And
I learned that from American Psycho.
Yeah? Yeah. Good one.
You spin a dreidel.
I got to rewatch that. Yeah. And so that's the thing about the poles shifting, is that it is impossible actually for them to say it's going to be another 1,000 years when they don't know just how quickly it flips once it gets to the point of no return. And when I look at religious texts, for example, like in the Quran, it talks about the day that the sun stood still and then the sun rose in the west. Mm-hmm. Now, just to be clear, because I researched this, the naysayers to that will say, oh, no, that's not talking about the physical sun. It's talking about when you die, you go into the west. It's not the same thing. I'm like, what if that's literal? They wrote down that the sun rose in the west. And it is a fact that the Earth's poles have shifted many times in the past. And then if you were to use your compass, it's going to show that the sun is rising in the west. Even though it'll still come up in the same direction. Like, just to be clear, this doesn't mean that the Earth flips over. However, there is other data that suggests that the Earth has changed dramatically. For example, there's fossilized crocodile bones or alligators, one or the other, in Alaska. Mm-hmm. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Now, don't worry, it's hundreds of millions years old again, older than the dinosaurs. Uh-huh. And maybe that's true, maybe it's not. I don't know. What I do know is that our understanding of Alaska being so far to the north where it should have been frozen forever, or mostly frozen, you know, but and the fact there was once crocodiles and alligators there, it's like, it seems to me that maybe at the time of the dinosaurs, you know, but then you could also argue that's just continental drift over hundreds of millions of years, and that where North America and the North Poles was in a separate location. So there you go, it's debunked. That's what they'll say.
Yeah,
because I've looked into this, and but our understanding of pole shifts is interesting. So let me give a shout out to Ben Davison of the channel Suspicious Observers. He is somebody that really focuses on sun cycles as well as the pole shifts, and I learned a lot from him, and he's a great guy. He has provided the scientific studies that show that these cycles of geomagnetic pole excursions, just to be clear, are, like I mentioned earlier, are partial pole flips. And it ties into the Adam and Eve story, is that what it describes is that every 6,500 years, there's a 90-degree flip, and then after 6 days, it flips back, and on the seventh day, things chill out again.
But that's of the geographic pole. I thought on the Thomas Chan.
Yes,
right?
it says. So let me be clear. That describes a physical flip,
right,
and that's what causes the continental crust displacement and the 2-mile high floods. And if I'm being honest, I think that's probably what happens. I'm simply trying to articulate that if the scientists are correct, and that's not what happens, you could also say that that partial flip, just the excursion itself, still caused catastrophic events on Earth, because what Ben Davison has shared is these studies that I was previously unaware of, is that there are correlations between geomagnetic pole excursions and mass extinction events. Not extinction level events at the size of the dinosaurs, but stuff that has caused mass die-offs. And there was a pole excursion 12,800 years ago. Or well, let me double check the date, like within that time frame, within a few hundred years of the 12,008 that I said. In that 12 to 13,000 years ago, there was a pole excursion. I was like, I hadn't heard of that. Is that what created the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe? Maybe it did. But there's other ones that he provided. Like, for example, there's one going back to what they thought was the 72,000 years ago, and there's another one 42,000 years ago. Both coincide with massive die-offs, including even of ancient hominids 40,000 years ago, related to the pole excursion. It's debated in the scientific community, but there's studies that corroborate it. And so, like the 72,000 years ago detail that I just mentioned, which coincides with a big extinction level event on Earth, was previously thought to be related to the Toba super eruption, where it's believed that and this is according to the fossil record, that humans the population on Earth may have decreased to just a few thousand people 72 to 74,000 years ago during that super eruption. But what's interesting, and this ties into my point before, where it's like if a pole shift happens and there's a movement inside the Earth, could that cause super volcanoes on the surface? We don't fully understand why super volcanoes happen. They just say, well, it's probably just a massive buildup in pressure over lots of time, and things go boom at larger levels than a regular volcanic eruption. Okay, I can wrap my head around that. But once I learned, and was surprised to learn, that Toba super eruption coincides with a pole excursion, an extinction level event, at the same ballpark period of time, it seems to me that there's something there. And let me add this one other point on top of it to get people thinking. And this ties into those who will say that a pole shift won't be catastrophic physically. No continental crust, no nothing. Okay, let's just think about this for a second. We're acknowledging that the Earth's molten iron core shifts. We also know that earthquakes originate in one of two places: the crust or the mantle. The soft part of the mantle, the molten part of the mantle. So sometimes the crust has an earthquake where it's just through friction, things slide, things move, and just bang, it's a quick earthquake. But other earthquakes originate in the mantle. If the mantle is sitting on top of the core, and the core shifts, would the core shifting not affect the mantle? And if our crust, which we sit on top of, experiences earthquakes that come from the mantle, are we really going to pretend there wouldn't be a chain reaction where the Earth's core shifts, it causes the mantle to be affected, which thus causes the crust to be affected, which results in earthquakes and volcanoes? Like, so when you connect the dots on these things, it seems extremely likely I don't care what some scientist tells you guys. They do not know. Let me be clear on this. I'll even look at the camera. We have no idea what happens during a pole shift. We have not experienced it. We haven't measured it scientifically. We know that they happen, and there's some parts of it that can be measured, such as how many times we believe they've happened within the last, I think in the last, it's either 3 million years, they believe there's been 700 of them. It's something crazy like that.
Yeah.
100 something that they have better knowledge of in the last, I forgot how many hundreds of thousands of years, but they say that the last full pole flip was 700,000 years ago, and we're a few 100,000 years overdue.
Right.
That's what they say. So when I look at all these details, and you connect the dots on it, it seems actually extremely reasonable to suggest that when a pole excursion, just a partial pole flip happens, it's actually going to be catastrophic. And the fact, okay, Ryan, did it say anything in that space.com article related to why the Earth's ocean currents are slowing? Because if I remember, if it's what I read, they said they weren't sure. I double check on it, but I'm thinking look, it's probably related to the poles shifting as we speak, which they are. But even if that's not related, they still don't know. And I'm again, Ryan, let me know if the article has any explanation. But the reality is that something is happening to cause that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, fascinating stuff. In terms of that whole what do you call it? The Gulf Stream, basically. Mm-hmm. That's like slowing. That could stop in the next couple of years. That we're projecting to potentially stop in the next couple of decades. I mean, that could lower the Earth's temperature by something like 14, 15 degrees, from what I understand, and be completely catastrophic to all life on the planet because of the global temperature changes that we would see coming down, not getting hotter, but coming down, which would lead to just a destruction of crops, a destruction of the ability to grow food natively wherever you're, could be absolutely horrendous. And what's causing it? Is it a pole? Is it whatever it is? It's happening. I mean, that much is I think science at this point. So there's a lot of there's a lot of crazy shit going on right now.
You want to hear something? All right. So you just mentioned that 15 degrees. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah.
So that's the same approximate temperature shift with the Younger Dryas. They say it was between 15 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, that shift that caused a 75% die-off of all mammals in North America.
Right.
And, another fun little topic is sun cycles. Are you familiar with the Little Ice Age?
Yeah. In the 15th century or something?
Yeah. So it lasted for approximately 500 years between 1350 and 1800, somewhere around that.
Okay. I didn't realize it was that long. Yeah.
Yeah, and it coincides with global famine, lower populations, increased disease, and then there was, so that's believed related to sun cycles, in that was at a time where they were documenting, because we were studying the sun at that period of time, and there was a decreased amount of sunspots. So there's a correlation between when there's more sunspots, the sun radiates more, and so we get more heat, and or cooling, and so the lack of sunspots resulted in more cooling. And it's not they're not 100% sure that's what caused the Little Ice Age, but that's the science that they believed is most likely related to. And then 2,000 years ago, there was something called the medieval Roman, or the Roman warming period, that throughout the Mediterranean upwards through the UK, there was an abundance of Roman wine vineyards in the UK. Mm-hmm. And that was, they believe, and there's a few other explanations, they're not 100% certain on it, but they also think it's related to the sun as well. And I'm like, well, that's a fascinating detail. And the reason why this is so important is that we're witnessing right now the sun go through a cycle, as it has many times before. And that's why we're seeing the northern lights as far down as Mexico and Alabama and Florida, and Arizona. And that in itself is also, and you don't see this in the articles, but one of the reasons is because the Earth's shields are declining. This is science, people. I'm not making this up. The Earth's shields are declining, and it's related to the pole shifts that are happening. The only thing they'll disagree with me on is saying that it's going to take another 1,000 years before we're affected. I don't think they're correct on that, but these things are happening. And the fact that they're happening, and so when the Earth's shields, say during a pole flip, so here's the big idea to some people involving the Younger Dryas. Not everyone agrees on this, but this is something that I've been entertaining, is that there was two events. Something 12,800 years ago that caused the rapid end of the last ice age, and there was warming at 11,600 years ago. So like 12 to 1,400 years apart, there was essentially 2 events. And so what if the pole excursion happened around that 12,800 years ago, which there's scientific data saying that it did, and that weakened the Earth shields, making us more susceptible to comets or asteroid impacts, cosmic impacts, let's just say, as well as the sun. So you have people like Dr. Robert Schoch. All right, so let me give you 2 examples. You got Graham Hancock that's talking about a cosmic impact of the North American ice shelf for the Younger Dryas. You have Dr. Robert Schoch, that vehemently disagrees. He gets so sensitive. I love the guy. He's brilliant.
Yeah.
But he cuts people, forgive me. He cuts people off that doesn't buy into the sun thing. He gets really sensitive about it, but he might be right. And Graham might be right. And then you get other people who are talking about the pole shift. They might be right, because hear me out. The pole shifts we know for a fact are happening, have happened many times in the past. When the poles flip and the magnetic field diminishes, we are now more susceptible to cosmic impacts as well as sun cycles.
Yeah.
So what's to say they all didn't happen in that same period of time? Because like when the Earth shields diminish, we're more susceptible to cosmic rays and solar flares. We're more susceptible to asteroids not burning up in the atmosphere. And so like something tells me that all these guys are correct. Honestly, I think that it's, and this is the part that makes it so wild, is that I think we should entertain that Earth is far more volatile than many people even want to believe. And this would explain why human history is such a massive enigma, that humans in our modern day skeletal cranial capacity date back, I think the oldest evidence now is approximately 330,000 years that they found humans with the same size cranial capacity as ours. And there's this huge gap in time between 300 plus thousand years ago and 6,000 years ago with the Sumerians, which is the first documented civilization, although I think Göbekli Tepe debunks that, but that's not a civilization. That's hunters and gatherers, of course. So it's like the fact that there's so much missing there, I think we should entertain that every few 10,000 years, whatever it is, things are happening, and it's a nonstop cycle of rinse, cycle, repeat on Earth, and it just washes it all away. I think I bet you. I bet you it's something like that, and we should be very grateful for the times that things are peaceful here, because, can I say one other thing too while I'm on the soapbox?
Yeah.
Here's something else that's mainstream science. It involves ice ages. And I heard Elon Musk talk about this on the Full Send podcast a couple years ago, where he, because Elon Musk has such a passion for getting off Earth. He's convinced that in order for the survival of the species, you have to get off. And it makes me think that he knows something. So when he was on that Full Send podcast, he mentioned ice ages being a deep, deep rabbit hole. And then he paused, and then he said, a deep, deep rabbit hole. And I'm like, what an interesting thing to say. This is a smart man. And so when you look into ice ages, a lot of people are not aware that we're actually in the middle of an ice age right now. I believe it started 3 million years ago.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that within ice ages, there's things called, and Randall Carlson has spoke on this at length, interglacials and interglacial periods. So according to mainstream data, there has been 4 or arguably 5 interglacial periods over just the last 450,000 years. And what that means is that there's been 4 or 5 periods of warming and cooling in that period, where a glacial period is where the glaciers grow, interglacial is where things warm and the glaciers recede. And so the fact that that's happened a handful of times. So I looked up the data, and this is according to Utah Geological Survey, which is very prestigious. It shows up at the top of Google. And it talks about how, thank you. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So 4 fairly regular interglacial cycles occurred during the last 450,000 years. And the shorter interglacials, which is what we're in right now, 10 to 30,000 years, were about as warm as present and alternated with much longer 70 to 90,000 years of cooling. So think about that. I went
There's
on,
that 15 degrees we were talking about.
yes.
Right? Yeah.
See, so this is what I'm talking about. So I'm not pulling this out of, this isn't from Bob's website, conspiracy blog spot. This is mainstream scientific data. And yeah, see, right out of utah.gov, the Utah Geological Survey. Thank you, Ryan, you're a killer. You're so good pulling this up because this is so important. Because I went on, all right, so I was on the Rogan podcast and I talked about how, these were my exact words. I said, the data might indicate that the earth is cold more often than it's hot. And then Media Matters, which was funded by George Soros, they did a hit piece on me about this. They say I contradicted mainstream science when I said that the earth might be cold more often than it's hot. The only thing I got wrong is saying that it might. No, the data shows definitively that the earth is cold far more often than it's warm. And we're in a blessed period of warming. But here's the messed up part, everybody. We're 11,600 years into the warming. And as you saw, it could be as little as 10,000 years. It says 10 to 30,000 years. So that means we're already in the window where it could start cooling again. And when that happens, it's game over. We're not going to go extinct as a species. Different corners of the earth will be fine or relatively unaffected.
The Amazon will keep our species going regardless of what our crazy civilization does. Yeah.
Maybe the Congo as well. It looks like that's pretty old. And so, but as far as society as a whole, and when you look at the Little Ice Age, which was only 3 degrees Celsius, so maybe 5 degrees Fahrenheit of a temperature shift, and that caused massive issues.
Right, it did, yeah.
And that's just a third of the 15 degrees difference that we're talking about here. So if the Little Ice Age was enough to cause a collapse in livestock as well as farming. What's the word? Agriculture. What's the word for planting crops? Agriculture. What am I trying to say here? Basically, it's a big word.
Yeah.
But the fact that caused an issue, it also caused a population decline and increased disease, and that was for something that was comparatively so much less significant.
Right.
It goes to show you that during the next glacial period. So okay. Why do we know so little about the last ice age, even though we know there was plenty of humans around? There was many humans. I'm not saying as many as today, obviously, but people were thriving during the ice age. So we may not have been thriving in Northern Europe, in North America, but things were going on elsewhere in the world. And yet there's this entire chapter where we know barely anything about humans during the ice age. All we find is primitive crap. I shouldn't say crap. I don't mean it disrespectful towards our ancestors, but think about it.
Yeah.
Very little. Yeah. We just have
the tools that we found are primitive. Yeah.
And very few complete fossils for humans. People might be surprised on because human bones aren't very thick and they deteriorate. And so it's hard to find a complete skeleton, from the ice age. Yes, I already know. I see the people coming out already. We have this guy frozen in the glacier. We have him. It's yes, there's some. I'm just saying, but there's so few and far between. And so, yeah, brother, I honestly think that when I look at, so what's causing those interglacial periods now? That's the big question.
Right.
So there's been 4 of them. And the reason why I say arguably 5 earlier is because when you look at the graph, it kind of looks like there's a 5th one, but 4 for sure. And so what's causing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be a catastrophe. It could be solar activity. It could be comet impact. It could be, flip.
I think it's the pole flip. Now, they will say, it's the Earth's precessional cycle and it tilts this way and this way. And that's also mainstream science as well. Mm-hmm. There's something called Milankovitch cycles. And there's 3 factors that involve them. One of which is the Earth's tilt. The other is the precessional cycle. And the other is the distance that the Earth is from the sun. Mm-hmm. All 3 of those factors, those 3 variables, are constantly changing. They're slow and they take vast periods of time. But each one of those variables independently affects weather on Earth. And the fact that they're all 3 happening simultaneously, even though they're slow and it takes time, they're constantly changing weather systems on Earth, as minuscule as it may be day by day and immeasurable, let's just say day by day, to be fair. But there's obviously a point where it hits a point of this threshold. And the Sahara Desert is proof of that, because their best evidence is the reason why the Sahara goes from green to a desert is because they say the precessional cycle, and it's a 20,000 year period. Okay, so here's a fun, provocative question. Where at all in the narrative of the man-made climate change today are any one of those three scientific factors being brought into the conversation? Not at all. Where are they bringing in the fact, and this is, I'm quoting a Nobel Prize laureate in physics. It may have been Dr. Clouser, forgive me. But he presented data not long ago showing that the Earth was much warmer 4,000 years ago. Where is that bringing brought into the conversation involving man-made climate change? Was it ancient cow farts in the Sahara that did that?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, so these are questions. Like, I encourage people to do this research. Like, this information is out there, and people should ask themselves, why is it not being brought into any of the conversations today? And Ryan, I don't know if you saw, was there any information and explanation involving the Earth's ocean currents, why they're slowing and may stop in 2025? Did it say anything like that?
I didn't find anything in that article, no.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's weird. Oh, so they just don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't. So I'm not saying we have all the answers, but like, they're not even going to mention the declining, the Earth's declining magnetic field, which is, you can find articles on that. I assure you that's a real thing. And that's also been said to be correlated with shifting ocean patterns, like I already mentioned. So,
Yeah. Right.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, it's declined 10% from 1850 to the year 2000, and then there's some evidence that it's declining faster over the last 24 years, much faster over the last 24 years than it had before that. Yeah, I'm with you. I think that that we are in an interglacial period, that we're not out of the ice age yet. That it started 2.5 million years ago, but that it didn't end 12,000 years ago. 2.5 million is a long period of time. That's going to keep going past this period once we get past this interglacial period and things cool down again. So I'm with you. I think it's highly likely that we're still in this. In the ice age, and we just don't realize it, and because we're living in a beautiful warm time now. Even I think it was President Trump a few years ago, back when he was president, made a comment like some scientists were talking about how it's getting warmer, and he's like, "Yeah, but it's going to get colder before it gets warmer." And
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I love this. So that was in September of 2020, when he was still in office, and during all those wildfires in California. He was at a meeting in Sacramento, and he met with the leading climate scientist. And the guy was rattling off about man-made climate change. Yeah. And President Trump, and I know he's such a, look, people, you can't even say his name without some people getting so upset. And then some people believe that anything he says is just nonsense or whatever. But the reality is this: he has been right about so many things. When he talked during COVID about UV light killing bacteria and stuff, that was actually true. That's science. People that have swimming pools know that you use UV lights as to help kill off the bacteria. I had one in my own swimming pool at the house I used to live in. So anyway, he said it like a matter of fact. He said, but it's going to cool first, right? He said it like a matter of fact. And the pompous climate change guy was like, oh, not according to the science. And he laughs and says, I don't think science knows, if you want to know the truth. Mm-hmm. And I knew what he meant. And I'm like, he's telling you. So like, here you have Jimmy Corsetti, the YouTuber that used to do fraud investigations for a retailer.
Mm-hmm. Hey, retailers are cool.
Of course.
And so are fraud investigators. We got to give a shout out to our LP department.
That's right. Loss prevention. Yeah. So if I can go looking for this info and find it and share it on your podcast today, I'm inclined to think that top level people, as some would describe them, know more than I do and are fully versed in this information. It was crystal clear to me the way Elon Musk alluded to it on his podcast, or on the Full Send podcast, when he talked about ice ages being a deep, deep rabbit hole. And if you look into it, he's telling you, you know what he's telling you? And I can't put words in his mouth, but it means he's looked into the data. He knows about glacials and interglacial periods, and he understands that when the next glacial period happens, our civilization, as we know it, is going to collapse. There's going to be no more internet, guys. Like when the next deep freeze happens, yeah, maybe we're technologically advanced to where portions in the southern hemisphere, which will be less impacted, will still be able to keep things going. I don't know. But like, and I want to believe, but the reality is that like it will change the human race. You'll probably have billions of people that will pass away, and it'll be game over as we know it. And it will be a whole new chapter of human history that will start after that. And one day they'll never know that Jimmy and Matt had talked about these vases on the podcast today. Right. But the reality is this, is that the fact that these things are known, that it's scientific fact, these things that I just presented to you, and you don't hear about it at all. How do they not even mention in that space.com article an explanation for why the ocean currents are slowing and might stop next year? Really? There's no scientists on Earth that can explain that? And they're not even going to bring in the magnetic field as part of the equation? And when there's other articles that literally state that the declining shields can cause issues with our ocean currents. So either that's just a lazy writer, which is possible, or they purposely left it out, because anytime I bring up anything related to...
Or Ryan didn't read it fully. That's the other option.
We love you, Ryan. So yeah, like, I guess in closing, that's my point, is that when you connect the dots on this information, it's abundantly clear that I think that there are people that know it, and unfortunately, they're not going to share it with us because maybe they know that it's imminent. Maybe they know that within our lifetimes, that next pole flip is coming. I'm not saying that it is. I don't know that it is.
Yeah.
But maybe.
Yeah, cool. One last little quick question, just to circle back to maybe 30 minutes ago real quick. What do you think on that possibility of that bridge, not the land bridge, but the island hopping as an explanation for the DNA that we see in the Aboriginal people from Australia going to South America?
Literally the best explanation I've seen. I'm going to have to make a video on it because that's the first time I've seen that.
Don't be like that one guy. You got to give me a little bit
of course. Matt Beall, Limitless, screenshot.
But you bet. It makes total sense, right?
It does. And it's so fun hearing you bring that up today, because I just learned something new where it was literally 7 years ago. I make this video talking about why aren't there Aboriginal DNA in North America? If the Bering Land Bridge was the thing. And you make the excellent point. Oh, okay. So they just went through the tundra, huh?
Right. Yeah. No.
And then just no evidence in North America at all. And yes, we would have found that evidence by now.
Right.
With all of the archaeological work that's been done involving Native Americans, that's prolific, actually. Yeah. And they don't have that DNA there, but they have it in South America. And then what you just showed on the screen, I can't wait to go down that rabbit hole and study that and see what all the science says about it and come up with my own conclusions. I'm going to study the elevations, or the depths, I should say, under the ocean. That is by far the most likely explanation.
I think so.
And one last point on it. There are ancient legends, not just of Atlantis, but of the lost continent of Mu. MU, from the Pacific, which alleges that there was a sunken continent in the Pacific Ocean. And that right there would explain that transoceanic sea travel to be able to go from whether it's Easter Island to Peru, which some archaeologists do acknowledge is very likely. And that's no little thing. It's like 2,400 miles. But the Polynesians getting all the way over to South America like that, it seems, I bet money that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's cool. It's good stuff, man. Just how can people follow you?
So I have a YouTube channel and a Rumble channel called Bright Insight. My name is Jimmy Corsetti. Let me give a big shout out to rumble.com. They've been so good to me. Look, I love YouTube. YouTube has been real good to me, but Rumble has been very good to me as well. And they're a growing platform where you can say anything you want without censorship. And that's incredibly important to me. I'm also growing a platform on X.com, formerly known as Twitter. Very happy with the changes that Elon Musk has made over there. I can make posts and make money. And not only that, some of my posts have gone viral. It's wild. Anybody can do it. So that's a special thing. I'm also on Instagram if you want to follow me more personally. It's Jimmy Corsetti or Bright Insight. And yeah, brother, it's been a total pleasure.
It's been fun, man.
You are an awesome guy, and I would love to do this again. And thank
it.
you for your hospitality. It's been a total pleasure coming to Sarasota to visit you, and I would love to do it again.
We'll do it for sure. Yeah, I've enjoyed every moment of it, and great to meet you and get to know you, man. And we gotta get you on your flight. You bet.
I gotta fly on out of here, and maybe I'll connect with you in Egypt sometime.
Yep. Yeah, that's a plan. Yep.
Right on.
Yep. Good stuff, man.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.